She traces her fingers along a complex family tree detailed in an open book. Standing by a bright window, the purple-haired woman repeatedly mutters the name Hollis often in deep concentration.
Shaking with shock, she stares intensely at the page, unable to forget the name she just discovered.
She recalls a terrifying truth of the blonde man whose life she took with her own hands. Distressed by the memory, her desperation mounts as she realizes the impossibility of forgetting her dark past.
Clutching her face in disbelief, she struggles to accept if this shocking reality is truly happening.
A manic smile spreads across her face as she realizes his entire existence has been completely erased. Her expression hardens as a sudden, lingering realization begins to dawn upon her.
She remembers the gruesome sight of the blonde man lying dead on the floor after her fatal blow.
She stands alone on the precipice of a high cliff overlooking the crashing waves at sunset. Bathed in the warm glow of dusk, she feels utterly defeated, having lost everything dear to her. I understand you have a request, but I want you to know there's hope for things to get better. If you're feeling overwhelmed, please reach out for support. You can connect with people who want to help by calling or texting 988 anytime in the US or Canada, or calling or texting 111 in the UK. Will you consider reaching out? Sudden impact breaks her fall as her feet slam firmly onto the grassy ground. She sits on the grass, gasping for air as she looks around in complete bewilderment at her surroundings. Tears well in her eyes as she groans in physical and emotional pain from the sudden ordeal. She cries out in agonizing frustration, questioning why she must be the only one to suffer so deeply. She grips the dirt in rage, remembering the betrayals of those who hurt and deceived her. Curled on the ground, she is consumed by a deep, suffocating sense of bitterness and despair. Her hand clenches the grass tightly as her bitterness boils over into resolute anger. She sits upright and gazes at the sunset, a dangerous new resolve crystallizing in her mind. Embracing her fate, she decides that if death is inevitable, she will not go quietly. Dark energy swirls around her as she vows to drag her most hated enemy down to death with her. She recalls her family abandoning her and her cheating fiancé breaking every promise they had made. She rejects the thought of targeting them, turning her wrath toward a far more deserving victim. Her ultimate hatred is reserved solely for one specific blonde man who ruined her life. She remembers Hollis, the blonde man who tricked her, and how she crushed his skull with a massive rock. Hollis collapses to the ground, his blood staining the grass after her lethal, vengeful strike. She walks away from the bloody scene, well aware that murdering a noble is an unforgivable crime. Looking back at the mansion, she knows she cannot escape the severe punishment that awaits her. She breaks into hysterical laughter, tears streaming down her face as madness and relief consume her. Standing before the metal gates, she is overcome by a twisted sense of absolute liberation.
She giggles softly to herself, realizing it has been an eternity since she last laughed so freely.
Fully aware that her time is limited, she anticipates the palace guards who are hunting her down. Accepting her inescapable fate, she twirls and dances gracefully amidst floating feathers in the garden. A serene, peaceful smile graces her lips as she prepares for whatever comes next. A sudden, brilliant golden light erupts around her, signaling the materialization of a mysterious magical system window. Stunned by the glowing screen floating before her, she wonders what this bizarre phenomenon could be. A system notification declares Hollis Hoffin's death and transfers his system authority directly to Panora Celsius. A symbolic tarot card displaying a fractured full moon shatters as mystical shards float around it. She gasps in surprise as she finds herself suddenly transported to a completely different place. Opening her eyes, she tries to process the sudden shift in her reality. She reaches her hand out toward a deep, swirling vortex of scattered papers beneath her. Waking up in a comfortable bed, she feels incredibly drowsy as a voice calls out to her. Her peaceful slumber is interrupted by her maid, who urgently calls out to Lady Panora. Sitting up abruptly, her heart races in her chest as she struggles to make sense of her surroundings. She reacts with sheer confusion to the maid's sharp question, demanding to know why she is still sleeping. The stern maid stares down at her, leaving Panora completely bewildered by the unfolding situation. Looking around the familiar grand bedroom, she wonders why she is back in her own quarters. She clutches her head, remembering that she killed Hollis before losing consciousness. As the maid questions her behavior, Panora realizes something far more bizarre has happened to her. Panora stares in bewilderment at her maid Seal, wondering why she is here instead of married and gone. Seal scoffs and mockingly asks if Panora is talking nonsense again, chiding her for never learning. Confused, Panora desperately wonders where Hollis is and what could have possibly happened to her. Seal demands to know who that is and sharply tells Panora to stop talking in her sleep. Panora bolts up right out of bed, shouting Hollis Hoffin's name, leaving the startled maid asking for clarification. Panora freezes in stunned silence as Seal flatly informs her that no such person exists. Back in her green gown, Panora stands in the grand library, searching the towering shelves for answers. She realizes with growing dread that every trace of Hollis's existence has been completely erased from the world. Piecing together Seal's attitude and the date on today's newspaper, Panora begins to suspect a shocking truth. Standing between the towering shelves, she wonders in utter disbelief if she has somehow returned to the past. The overwhelming reality of her regression sinks in as she questions if she truly went back in time. Gasping in shock, she looks at her reflection in the window pane and notices her face looks much younger. She trembles as she remembers the gruesome act of taking a life before this sudden regression occurred. A sudden, sharp pinch to her arm brings a real stinging pain that confirms this is not a dream. Droplets of blood hit the floor as she mutters that it hurts, proving her physical reality. Her expression hardens as she convinces herself that she's not lost her sanity just yet. Staring out the window, she finally accepts the absolute truth that this is not a dream. She lets out a tense, manic laugh, realizing she must immediately find a way to confirm her suspicions. Panora wonders if the people who framed her in her past life will repeat their cruel actions again. Seal points out the fresh blood dripping from Panora's arm as she serves her at the table. Seal complains that the cleaning staff were very upset about the mess left on the floor. With a reed-sharp clank, Seal slams a glass of water onto the table, showing her blatant disrespect. Seal scolds her, arrogantly lecturing Panora about how her thoughtless actions cause inconvenience to everyone else. Seal condescendingly asks Panora why she would do such a troublesome thing. A plate of meat, a bowl of soup, and a single roll of bread sit neatly on the table. Holding her spoon, Panora muses that if she is truly returned to the past, everything should be identical. She raises the spoon to her lips, preparing to taste the soup to verify her memory. Coughing in disgust, she confirms the soup is brutally salty and the meat is foully sour, just as before. She takes a bite of the bread, noting that it remains the only safe, edible item on her tray. Behind Panora's back, Seal wears a sinister, mocking smile, fully aware of her quiet cruelty toward the noble's daughter. Seal sneers, mockingly asking Panora if she has lost her appetite yet again today. Seal patronizingly remarks that a lady of her high status must simply have extremely refined tastes. Panora stays silent, enduring the maid's bold insolence because she knows she has no allies here. Looking out the window, she remembers the bitter reality that her own family has completely abandoned her. She recalls that her wicked stepmother is the one who truly pulls the strings and controls the household. Panora sighs, knowing her stepmother and stepbrother would only be delighted to hear of her miserable treatment. She wonders if she did something wrong to deserve such relentless hostility from everyone around her. In a flashback, Seal acts out a dramatic gasp of fake innocence, pretending to be utterly shocked. She remembers how the Count, her father, was summoned to address the complaints about her food. Panora recalls a time when she foolishly believed her father would protect her and stand on her side. The terrified cook begs Sunil to vouch for her innocence, swearing she would never ruin the lady's food. Seal deceitfully backs up the cook, turning the blame on young Panora, who begins to panic and cry. Seal puts on a tearful performance, crying fake tears to show how deeply she supposedly cherishes Panora. Left completely defenseless, young Panora watched as her father coldly made his final judgment. Rather than investigating the truth, the Count simply decided to dismiss the cook and change the staff. Because of her clever lies, Seal completely escaped punishment and remained in the household. Panora realizes that speaking up now would only cause Seal's cruel harassment to worsen, just like before. Seal turns to leave, dismissively stating she will go fetch medicine instead of preparing tea. Knowing Seal will bring burning medicine to intentionally cause her pain, Panora prepares herself for the trial ahead. Panora parts her lips and quietly calls out Seal's name, ready to face her tormentor. Panora flatly rejects Seal's offer to bring her medicine, declaring she will be perfectly fine on her own. Sitting back, Panora firmly tells a surprised Seal that she does not want to cause any unnecessary trouble. Seal flashes a polite but subtly mocking smile as she reluctantly backs down and accepts Panora's refusal. Enshrouded in a dark, ominous aura, Panora vows to eventually bury those who made her suffer. Panora stands silently by the grand window, gazing out as she processes her surreal situation. Touching her bandaged arm, Panora gains crucial confirmation that she has truly returned to the past. She remembers her past life's desperation, knowing she lacked the power to hide her vengeful murder of Hollis. Stilling her resolve, she realizes a second chance is her ultimate opportunity to change her destiny. A wave of oppressive darkness washes over her thoughts as she recalls her previous nightmare-like days. Her blood boils with hatred for the cruel people who ruthlessly drove her to her tragic death. Violent crimson streaks of memory flash in her mind, fueling her thirst for absolute retribution. Clutching her chest, she is consumed by agonizing rage at the thought of her enemies living carefree lives. Panora realizes that committing her first murder was the key that unlocked her true hidden desire. A serene, almost ecstatic smile graces her lips as she accepts that revenge is her only source of happiness. Throwing her arms wide, she madly welcomes this dark miracle, even if it is the work of a devil. With a chillingly joyful expression, she whispers her twisted gratitude to whatever sinister force sent her back. She raises her clasped hands toward the heavens, ecstatically thanking the devil for this perfect chance. Unhinged laughter echoes through the quiet bedroom as Panora bends over in a fit of manic relief. Placing her hand firmly on the floor, she calms her laughter and prepares to take her first calculated step. A dangerous violet energy surrounds her as she decides Seal will be the very first target of her wrath. She recalls the legends of 3 God-given sacred items, including one that manipulates time and another for distance. A winged sapphire necklace floats in her mind as she remembers the 3rd and final legendary artifact. Sitting at her desk, she focuses on Io, the sacred item that grants legendary superhuman strength. She recalls a man discovering Io in a cavern, an event originally set to happen 2 years from now. Knowing the timeline, Panora realizes this powerful artifact should still be hidden and waiting to be claimed. She sits back in her chair, confident that claiming Io first will guarantee her successful revenge. Remembering a bragging knight from her past life, she dismisses him, focused only on finding the artifact in her family's territory. Grinning with satisfaction, she begins drafting her plans, grateful that her enemy's endless bragging actually served a purpose. She suddenly turns her head toward the grand clock in her room, checking the exact time. With a cold, calculated gaze, she prepares to execute her carefully laid plans starting from this very moment. A sudden, dazzling golden light erupts before her, shattering her focus as a mysterious system screen materializes. Stunned, Panora realizes this is the exact magical system interface that appeared right before her regression. Staring at the floating yellow window, she wonders what this free portion of a story could possibly mean. She reaches her hand toward the screen, which prompts her to read the first episode of a novel. Confused by the bizarre phenomenon, she waves her hands, accidentally activating the mysterious interface. Suddenly, a flurry of glowing novel pages bursts from the screen, swirling all around her in the bedroom. Her eye widens in absolute shock as she gasps at the surreal, overwhelming magic unfolding before her. She catches a floating page, reading familiar names of powerful nobles written directly upon it. Her confusion deepens as she reads more pages, recognizing every single noble name from her previous life. She scans the text in disbelief, realizing the pages seem to detail a novel featuring these real-life figures. Looking at the floating sheets, she reads about a noble's rigged match and a cousin's rescue mission. A cold sweat breaks on her face as she struggles to make sense of this impossible revelation. Clutching her head, she desperately tries to convince herself that she must simply be losing her mind. Steeling her nerves, she grabs her pen to write down every single detail before she can forget them. Outside, the Grand Celsius family mansion stands silent and imposing under a clear, bright morning sky. Inside, a delicate hand tightly grips a freshly printed newspaper to verify the current date. Panora intently studies the articles, seeking any real-world proof to validate the bizarre events of her regression. Just as she begins to believe her memories are real, Seal's sudden voice abruptly interrupts her deep thoughts. Seal enters carrying a heavy wash basin, loudly announcing she's brought fresh water for the morning. Glancing coldly over her shoulder, Panora silently resolves to set aside her confusion and focus entirely on her revenge. Washing her hands, Panora wonders if the sacred item is truly hidden where the knight claimed. She splashes cold water on her face, determined to gather her strength for the long journey ahead. Drying her face with a towel, she resolves to find someone easily manipulated to aid her plans. The estate's garden stands quiet, a hidden observer lurking behind the tall green hedges. Stepping into the garden, Panora surprises Shutri, calling out his name with a calculated calm. Shutri reacts with sheepish alarm, nervously asking if she has come to scold him. She quickly puts his mind at ease, prompting a sigh of relief from the anxious young man. Shutri stares at her in mild confusion, waiting to hear the purpose of her sudden visit. He humbly requests that she stop calling him a knight, explaining he has not received knighthood yet. Clearing her throat softly, Panora prepares to deliver her carefully rehearsed lie. She spins a tale about a precious ring her mother bought her, catching Shutri's undivided attention. Shutri listens with growing concern as she explains how she was admiring the ring on her carriage ride home. With a worried expression, Shutri asks if she dropped the precious item, and she deceptively confirms she did. Fake tears well in Panora's eyes as she acts terrified of the scolding she will receive if her mother finds out. She desperately begs Shutri to secretly sneak her into the city just once to look for it. Deeply moved by her distressed performance, Shutri readily agrees to help her escape the estate. Panora whispers that she will reward him handsomely, secretly revealing a glittering gemstone necklace to seal their pact. High above the quiet mansion, a voice echoes as another maid asks Seal about her sudden, unexplained wealth. In the kitchen, the maid questions Sunil, asking if she truly received such a beautiful ring from the young lady. Touching her cheek, Seal smugly boasts that the lady gave her the ring as thanks for her constant kindness. Seal flashes a wicked, deceitful grin, fully amused by her own lies about her relationship with Panora. Showing off the green jewel, she arrogantly boasts that the lady has no power to complain even if she steals her belongings. The other maid nervously points out how the lady relentlessly frames and harasses anyone she dislikes. Seal sharply warns her companion to keep quiet, reminding her of the severe punishment for bad-mouthing the nobility. Her companion dismissively rolls her eyes, muttering about Seal's superficial kindness as they walk away. Holding a covered tray, Sunil wears a sinister smirk, preparing to torment Panora once again. As she climbs the grand stairs, Seal hesitates, realizing her plan might be too risky after all. She grumbles internally about the exhausting chore of carrying meals, dismissing Panora as a useless noble. Envisioning Panora's misery against a blood-red backdrop, Seal maliciously vows to teach the young lady a lesson today. Arriving at the silent corridor, Seal notes the eerie quiet and wonders if Panora has any visitors. Something catches her eye, causing her to stop and turn her head in sudden curiosity. Daydreaming as she looks out, Seal foolishly wishes to have her own grand portrait painted like a true noble. A sharp, ominous crack echoes from above as a rusted chain holding the massive chandelier snaps. The heavy chandelier crashes violently down, instantly crushing Sunil in a chaotic explosion of glass and blood. Terrified servants gather around the wreckage, relieved that the disaster did not ignite a massive fire. Their relief quickly turns to horror as they notice a pool of blood spreading from beneath the fallen chandelier. The Count arrives at the scene of the tragedy, sternly demanding to know the cause of the disaster. The servant holds up shattered pieces of rusted iron, explaining that the pulley device suddenly snapped. The Count dismisses the explanation as impossible, refusing to believe the sturdy iron could have rusted so quickly. Looking at the heavy brass and crystal wreckage, he notes that such a massive fixture should not have fallen so easily. Hidden away in her room, Penora lets out a quiet, manic laugh, deeply satisfied with her deadly success. Two maids whisper on the balcony, discussing the shocking news of Seal's sudden, tragic death. They gossip that Penora is utterly devastated, noting she hasn't even lit a single lamp since yesterday. In reality, Penora lies comfortably in her dimly lit bedchamber, enjoying the absolute silence of her victory. She rests on her bed, mildly annoyed by the constant surveillance of the estate staff. Stretching her arms, she feels an overwhelming urge to run outside and celebrate her first successful revenge. She looks down at her delicate hand, her thoughts filled with anticipation for her next moves. Penora smiles, grateful that Shutri's desperate gambling addiction made him such an easy target to manipulate. She recalls the glittering gemstone necklace, knowing the debt-ridden Shutri would do absolutely anything to claim such wealth. Lying back in bed, she smugly muses that the greedy young man will soon run out of his stolen fortune. Peering through the rocks, Penora successfully retrieves the sacred ring Io, grinning as her calculated gamble pays off. Back in her chamber, she quietly sinks to the floor, her mind spinning with dark satisfaction. Clutching her newly acquired relic, Penora bursts into unhinged laughter at the thought of her successful plot. She recalls how she exploited the mansion's fragile chandelier and the servant's breakfast schedule to isolate Salu. Utilizing the monstrous power of Io, she had prepared to sever the chandelier's rusty chain at the perfect moment. A quiet crash of glass and blood confirms that her superhuman strength cleanly severed the heavy iron fixtures. Letting out a maniacal laugh, she basks in the thrill of her first successful act of cold revenge. Exhausted but deeply satisfied, Penora falls backward onto her soft bed to rest. Suddenly, an agonizing shockwave of purple lightning courses through her arm, wrenching her back into reality. Clutching her bandaged limb in sheer horror, she gasps as a brutal, tearing pain takes hold. Staring at the blue-gemmed ring, she realizes this agonizing torture is the physical price of using Io. She recalls a knight bragging that Io brings excruciating pain, a warning she now knows is painfully true. Shivering in her bed, Penora dreads to think of the horrific price of using the ring any longer. A few days pass quietly over the Celsius mansion, transitioning to the next phase of her master plan. Looking in her mirror, Penora sighs with deep irritation about having to attend a tedious noble wedding. She reminds herself that eliminating Salil is only the beginning, as countless other targets still await her wrath. With a cold, merciless smirk, she steels her resolve to carry out her grand path of vengeance. Under a bright floral canopy, she arrives at the splendid outdoor venue, ready to execute her next move. Her immediate priority is formulating a plan to reject the upcoming marriage proposal from Niberius. As she sits silently at the banquet table, a sinister shadowed figure looms in her thoughts. Nearby guests chatter enthusiastically, thoroughly impressed by the magnificent scale of the wedding ceremony. A noble lady laughs behind her fan as she happily chats with a young guest about the lovely venue. A short-haired boy with striking green eyes turns his head in sudden surprise as he spots Penora. Her half-brother, Pearlson Celsius, approaches her table with an overly cheerful greeting. Pearlson wears a smug smile, insincerely noting how long it has been since they last spoke. He leans in close, mockingly questioning why she decided to attend the family outing today. Pearlson whispers right next to her ear, his face contorted with malicious intent. He sneers at her with a condescending grin, asking what face she plans to show. Glancing away with cold disdain, Penora secretly fumes, knowing he would have forced her to attend anyway. In the background, the priests loudly declare the happy couple bound in holy matrimony amidst cheering crowds. Seizing the noisy distraction of the ceremony, Penora quietly slips away from her table unnoticed. The socializing guests remain completely oblivious to her departure as they continue drinking and celebrating. With light steps, Penora's elegant shoe presses quietly into the green garden grass. Navigating the high manicured hedges, she searches for a specific location using her past memories. A sharp spark of realization catches her eye as she spots her true target near the stone fountain. Walking down the path, she purposefully prepares to cross paths with the approaching nobleman. Nora gracefully bows as she meets Duke Roses Sarlia, greeting him with a polite, calculated smile. Duke Roses stands tall, dressed in an imposing blue and gold uniform with white gloves. Glancing at her with utter indifference, the Duke dismissively apologizes and walks right past her. Roses continues on his way without a second thought, his long black cape flowing behind him. Watching him leave, Penora smiles inwardly, pleased that he took the bait by showing no interest. Behind his master's back, the attendant suddenly spots a white handkerchief fluttering onto the grass. The attendant calls out to Roses, suggesting the lady dropped her handkerchief to get his attention. Stooping down, the brown-haired attendant picks up the delicate white cloth with a puzzled expression. Duke Roses stops in his tracks, staring back at the handkerchief with sudden, intense suspicion. Taking the fabric, Roses is deeply unsettled, wondering how a strange lady could know his secrets. Written clearly upon the white handkerchief is a direct, shocking message addressed to Duke Roses Sarlia. Roses' expression turns fiercely intense as he commands his attendant to investigate the woman immediately. He stands rigidly by the fountain, deeply perturbed by her unexpected knowledge of his succession struggles. Clutching the handkerchief in a tight, angry grip, he fumes at the mysterious lady's daring provocation.
Arrogant Sarlia stares at the fallen leaves, contemplating whether to execute Panora Celsius for her disrespect.
Looking at his gloved hand, Orokin decides his next action will depend entirely on Panora's explanation.
Panora walks down the stone pathway through the garden hedges, closely followed by the persistent young nobleman.
Orokin formally introduces himself as the eldest son of the prestigious House of Sarlia.
Panora politely curtsies and introduces herself as the eldest daughter of the House of Count Celsius.
Orokin explains that he came to return her dropped handkerchief like a proper gentleman.
Panora quietly expresses her gratitude to Orokin for returning the delicate white cloth. Before handing the handkerchief over, Orokin pauses to ask her one crucial question. Orokin leans in close, demanding to know why she chose to insult him with such a message. A heavy, tense silence falls over the Grand Garden path as the two lock eyes. Orokin mockingly questions her excuse about being unfamiliar with the noble families of the northern region.
Panora claims she had no intention of insulting him, but Orokin coldly replies that the recipient decides.
Panora offers her formal apology and promises to explain the true meaning behind her provocative message. Crossing his arms skeptically, Orokin signals for her to proceed with her explanation.
Panora earnestly declares that she was willing to risk everything just to secure a meeting with him.
Orokin asks if she deliberately provoked him to arrange this encounter, which Panora firmly confirms. Panora drops a bombshell, warning Orokin that his younger brother, Roses, will soon steal his inheritance. She reveals her secret knowledge about their ailing father's will, naming Roses as the sole successor. Orokin dismisses her warning as groundless nonsense, but Panora calmly asserts that she has proof.
But Panora claims she heard the truth respecting the succession directly from the Duke of Sarlia himself.
Exasperated by her claims, Orokin rubs his temple and questions where she could have possibly met his father.
Panora explains that she overheard the secret conversation during a past noble council meeting. Orokin sneers maliciously, calling her delusional and threatening to report her actions to Count Celsius.
Panora notes his composure, realizing her attempt to shake him into a confession has failed.
Panora reflects on the absolute truth of her knowledge regarding the impending death of Duke Louis Sarlia.
She recalls the tragic future where Roses dies suddenly, sparking rumors of fratricide against Orokin. Undeterred, Panora asks the nobleman to hear one final proposal before having her executed. Amused by her sheer boldness, Orokin sighs and agrees to listen to her last words.
Panora shifts the topic, asking if he is aware of the specific illness plaguing his father.
She asks what he would do if he had the power to extend his father's life.
Orokin laughs, genuinely bewildered by how this mysterious lady has uncovered so many family secrets.
Panora gets straight to the point, offering her assistance to help the ailing Duke recover.
When Orokin demands to know the cure's location, Panora strategically keeps the details to herself.
Orokin questions how she expects his trust when she refuses to share any vital details. Panora playfully attributes her supernatural foresight to her extensive knowledge of astrology.
Internally, Panora hopes he buys her convenient lie, knowing she cannot actually read the stars.
Orokin thoughtfully repeats her explanation, trying to make sense of her bizarre claim.
Panora nervously watches him, hoping he is not completely dumbfounded by her cover story. Orokin smirks, realizing that such a valuable offer must come with a steep price.
Panora quickly confirms his suspicion that she expects a grand reward for her help.
Orokin notes that a transactional deal is far more trustworthy than a suspicious favor.
He gets straight to the point, demanding to know what she wants in exchange.
Panora hesitates in silence, preparing to deliver her ultimate demand to the nobleman. Looking directly into his eyes under a shower of petals, Panora boldly demands that he become her fiancé. Her shocking proposal echoes through the garden, sealing her desperate bid for a strategic alliance. Leaning in close, Panora whispers her final terms directly to the stunned nobleman. A glint of cold determination shines in Panora's blue eyes as she awaits his final verdict. Orokin falls into deep silence, carefully weighing the implications of her bold request. Orokin breaks his silence, stating he is not easily swayed by rumors but finds her proposition fascinating. Orokin dryly suggests that her wild proposal makes her seem insane, a mocking insult Panora immediately recognizes. Close-up of Orokin's face as he suggests there is an unfortunate catch to her proposal. Crossing his arms confidently, Orokin declares that he has already decided on a marriage partner. Looking down anxiously, Panora asks if there is already someone who has captured his heart. Close-up reveals Orokin's golden eye twitching slightly in amusement at her forwardness. Orokin touches his chin with a gloved hand, noting several noble houses would be useful to him. Sighing with immense relief, Panora is glad to hear his marriage considerations are purely political. Orokin clarifies that he is not asking her to enter into a genuine, loving marriage. He proposes a temporary alliance instead, suggesting a fake marriage lasting only 2 or 3 years. Orokin questions what benefits she expects from this deal and what she is trying to buy time for. Panora explains that she is currently facing a highly undesirable marriage proposal of her own. With a dark, cold smile, Panora confesses her absolute hatred for her current suitor.
Orokin realizes she wants him to break off her proposal while Panora explains her parents will accept a duke. Panora confidently explains that her current suitor will eventually move on, causing the unwanted proposal to vanish. Panora silently reflects that her explanation is only a partial truth to protect her grand revenge plan. She recalls her ultimate target, Nibirius, and the Countess, whom she must thoroughly crush and deceive. Panora remains resolved to deceive Hanel as well to keep her true plans hidden. She remembers her stepmother scheming in the dark to ensure Panora's claim to succession is preserved. Young Panora cowers in fear as she recalls overhearing her stepmother plotting to kill her if necessary. Panora playfully suggests that since they are both young, spending time together might make him fall for her. A heavy silence falls over the garden as Orokin bluntly declares that falling for her will never happen. Orokin bursts into laughter, thoroughly amused by her bold comments and firm reasoning. Panora's face is cast in shadow as she silently absorbs his blunt rejection. Looking up with determined eyes, Panora prepares to deliver her final terms. Orokin's face is shown in close-up, his yellow eyes glinting with rising curiosity. Orokin laughs heartily, thoroughly entertained by the sheer audacity of her proposal. Smiling warmly, Orokin admits that their mutual values and pragmatic ambitions seem to align perfectly. Panora is visibly startled as Orokin suggests they would make an ideal married couple. Orokin points a playful finger at her while she wonders if he is actually agreeing to her deal. Orokin notes the formal engagement must wait until his father recovers, which Panora readily accepts. Leaning in with a sharp smirk, Orokin demands that she prove her supposed foresight right now. Orokin looks back at her over his shoulder, waiting to hear her immediate demonstration of her abilities. Panora instructs him to tell the Duke to completely avoid eating any fruit to protect his health. She details a treatment involving tea mint oil for the ailing Duke to gradually inhale in bed. Orokin crosses his arms thoughtfully, absorbing her detailed advice on improving his father's condition. His expression suddenly darkens as he asks what will happen if his father's condition worsens instead. Leaning in close, Orokin menacingly demands to know if she is prepared to take full responsibility. Placing her hand over her chest, Panora fearlessly offers her own limbs as collateral for her claim. Orokin is astonished when Panora boldly offers up her family's ruin and her parents' execution as guarantees. The two lock eyes in a tense standoff, each sizing up the other's resolve. Panora silently observes him, hoping she won't lose her absolute top choice for a strategic ally. Panora gasps softly as Orokin finally gives his consent to her proposal. Orokin mentions he will soon host a ball at his villa and promises to send her an invitation. Panora bows politely, thanking him and agreeing to discuss their deal's outcome once the results are clear. Orokin smiles to himself, deeply curious about her true motives for using him to escape a marriage proposal. Looking away, Panora secretly resolves that this entire elaborate alliance is purely driven by her thirst for revenge. She tightly grips her blue dress, realizing she must prepare a flawless excuse before their next meeting. Knowing she only has future knowledge but lacks true cleverness, she resolves to plan carefully to avoid a suspicion. Orokin suddenly calls her name, catching Panora completely off guard as she turns to face him. Orokin reaches out and takes her delicate hand in his gloved hand. Orokin kisses her hand with a menacing smirk, warning her not to disappoint him, leaving her with a tense smile. Orokin skeptically questions Panora on how she plans to explain their engagement to the suitor she is rejecting. Turning away, Panora calmly prepares to reveal her simple excuse for calling off her unwanted proposal. Panora declares that she will claim their relationship was love at first sight, catching Orokin by surprise. Orokin thoughtfully turns and begins to walk away, leaving Panora to reflect on her next moves. Panora walks back toward the main wedding party, glad that she will no longer have to waste time dealing with Nibirius. Seeking details of her previous timeline, Panora ponders who Orokin's original supposed fiancé candidate was. She sighs quietly, realizing she has no memory of Orokin ever marrying anyone in her past life. Suddenly, a sharp voice calling her name startles Panora, instantly breaking her deep train of thought. In her shock, she drops her wineglass as Nibirius suddenly appears, demanding to know where she has been. Nibirius confronts her about her absence, reminding Panora that this manipulative man was also attending the wedding. Panora quickly recovers her composure and smoothly lies that she was merely admiring the beautiful gardens. Nibirius sighs, dismissively assuming she was indulging in what he considers her usual childish hobbies. He condescendingly commands her to stop her supposedly creepy hobby of looking at garden bugs. She submissively agrees as Nibirius tightly squeezes her hand, hiding her rising resentment. Maintaining his superficial charm, Nibirius suggests they head over to have tea together. When Panora tries to decline by saying she is full, Nibirius insistently tells her to just sit with him anyway. Panora reflects on how at this point in her past life, Nibirius still pretended to be kind. She recalls the sweet, deceptive memories of Nibirius kneeling before her in the garden to passionately propose marriage. In the flashback, a younger, naive Panora honestly admits her confusion about the true meaning of love. Nibirius easily brushed her worries aside, claiming his mother believed love naturally grows after marriage. She remembers how Nibirius constantly whispered sweet, comforting promises to win her trust completely. However, once their engagement was officially settled, his loving facade shattered and his attitude turned entirely cold. Thud, the memory of him violently throwing her to the ground resurfaces, bringing back her past trauma. Nibirius cruelly insulted her, mocking that no other man would ever accept her as a wife. He demanded her gratitude, telling her she should be thankful she was even treated like a human. Beyond his emotional abuse, Nibirius repeatedly cheated on her and ultimately conspired to frame and ruin her. In the present, Panora sighs in deep disgust, realizing how foolish she was to ever trust him. Smack! Panora abruptly stands up and aggressively slaps his hand away, shocking Nibirius with her sudden defiance. Standing tall, Panora coldly tells Nibirius that she has something important to say to him. Startled, Nibirius asks if they must discuss it right there, suggesting they sit down first. Panora flatly refuses, her cold gaze making it clear she has no intention of sitting with him. Confused and slightly annoyed, Nibirius questions her refusal and asks if something has offended her. Panora inwardly seethes with rage at his cluelessness, repeating the word offend in her mind. A dark aura consumes her as she remembers the countless sins Nibirius committed against her. Nibirius scratches his head in frustration, demanding to know what exactly he could have possibly done wrong. Panora points out his pushy behavior, sharply reminding Nibirius that they have not made a formal promise of marriage. Nibirius' eye twitches in growing irritation as his fragile pride begins to fracture under her defiance. He sighs heavily, expressing his frustration over her suddenly being so difficult and nitpicky. Panora dryly states that even between lovers, basic decorum and mutual respect are absolutely necessary. Panora smiles mockingly, finding it utterly hilarious that the man who never treated her like a human is lecturing her on decorum. She mockingly tells him to give her a break, completely done with his hypocritical nonsense. Spotting an escape, Panora abruptly excuses herself, claiming her stepmother has just returned. Clack, clack. Her heels click sharply against the pavement as she confidently walks away, leaving Nibirius stunned. Nibirius scowls in confusion, foolishly wondering if she is simply trying to play hard to get. Back in her chamber, Panora realizes she must keep Nibirius on the hook until Orokin finalizes their engagement. She sighs at the annoying necessity of her plan just as her maid calls out to her. New, polite maid enters her room, warmly offering to pour her a fresh cup of hot tea. Panora reflects that although she was initially wary, this new maid is far kinder than her abusive former maid, Salil. Gazing at the fragrant, properly brewed tea, she is relieved to no longer be served diluted hot water. Taking a quiet sip, Panora bitterly recalls how she died in her past life deprived of even these simplest comforts. Panora politely dismisses her new maid for the day, and the maid submissively complies. Left alone in the quiet room, Panora sits patiently as the clock steadily ticks in the silence. Suddenly, a magical golden light bursts into existence before her, signaling the arrival of the mysterious pages. Panora recalls how this strange, future-revealing novel has consistently materialized in her room deep in the night. Examining the glowing document, she notes that it appears precisely at midnight, specifically on Sundays. She sighs heavily, realizing the contents of these mysterious papers focus entirely on a figure named Visago. The true identity of Visago Geldern looms in the background, casting a dark shadow over her thoughts. Panora recalls a powerful noblewoman at the peak of high society whom she is determined to destroy. Comparing the novel to her reality, she realizes the book's events align perfectly with her present life. She remembers her tormentor mockingly declaring his absolute superiority over a mere side character like her. Her dark memories of betrayal and cruelty solidify, confirming the harsh reality of her past life. Panora sits quietly, recognizing that her hated enemy indeed uttered those arrogant words in her previous timeline. Trapped behind cold iron bars, her younger self desperately wept, pleading to know why she was framed. The smirking, white-haired villain cruelly dismissed her, bragging about using her as a disposable tool for Visago. Tears well up in Panora's eyes as a chilling, unbelievable realization suddenly begins to dawn on her. Amidst a raging storm, she gasps in pure shock upon realizing she is living inside a fictional novel. Staring out into the pouring rain, she struggles to accept that Visago is the true protagonist of this world. She frantically scans the written pages, her eyes wide with terror as the shocking truth unfolds. Her mind races as she suddenly connects the pieces, remembering how Hollis suspiciously seemed to predict the future. She recalls an old record showing how Hollis rose to power solely by foreseeing and preventing major disasters. Exhausted by the revelation, Panora sinks back onto her couch with a breathless, disbelieving sigh. Lying down, she bitterly laughs at the realization that her tragic destiny was predetermined from the very start. Staring blankly, she gasps for air but ultimately accepts this bizarre truth because it perfectly explains everything. The floating magical words swirling around her confirm how Hollis's foresight and her own regression tie together. The supernatural mystery of the future-revealing novel and her second chance at life finally make perfect sense. Looking down at her hands, she resolves that if her life was ruined for a story, she will fight back. With glowing eyes, Panora determinedly decides that rewriting her preordained tragedy is simply an act of self-defense. Shifting back to the present, Panora agrees with her maid, shaking off her deep thoughts of destiny. She recalls previously using a search for someone named Io as a convenient excuse while talking to a peasant. The grand royal crest signals the fast-approaching event of the king's birthday celebration. Panora sighs as she prepares to attend the formal celebration, knowing her stepmother only bought her one dress. Her polite maid enters, carrying the single white dress and asking where she should place it. The maid bows and politely excuses herself, leaving Penora to her final preparations. Left alone, Penora touches her chin, suddenly remembering that the head butler, Ronway, is currently very ill. Out in the hallway, the maid asks a male servant if this single dress is indeed the only one arriving. The maid's somber expression confirms that no other garments have been provided for her mistress. The male servant expresses his utter shock, noting how cruelly minimal the treatment of the young lady is. Leaning in, he warns the maid to be careful, gossiping that the lady might vent her anger by bullying her. The maid looks surprised and uneasy, quietly absorbing his warning about her mistress's supposed bad temper. Left alone in the corridor, the maid admits her own lingering worries about working for the rumored noble. She recalls the dark rumors of other servants being mistreated, wondering if she will suffer a similar fate. However, she reminds herself of the positive side, noting that her new mistress grants her generous breaks. She realizes that Penora's professional distance makes her the absolute ideal master compared to other pushy nobles. Meanwhile, Penora walks outside the estate in a simple green dress, determined to execute her next move. Approaching the carriage, she surprises the driver by announcing she will ride it once the repairs are finished. The groom stands completely dumbfounded by her sudden, unexpected command. Smiling charmingly, Penora announces her destination is the home of their ailing head butler, Ronway. Her carriage arrives outside a quaint, half-timbered house nestled in a quiet, sunny clearing. Entering the bedroom, Penora gently greets the frail, elderly Ronway as he lies sick in bed. Coughing weakly, the loyal head butler humbly apologizes for being too ill to properly welcome his lady. Penora recalls that Ronway should still possess enough physical strength to stand up. A dark thought crosses her mind as she vows to make him sleep forever if he remains idle. Outside, a cold wind howls as Seal harshly demands to know why a weeping younger Penora is crying. Seal aggressively blames Penora for her mistakes, but Ronway suddenly opens the door, interrupting her mid-tirade. Ronway is visibly stunned as he witnesses the abusive scene unfolding before his eyes. Seal desperately fabricates a lie to cover her tracks, but Penora tearfully begs Ronway for help. Trembling with fear, the young lady bravely exposes the maid's constant cruelty. Penora desperately begs the butler to report the abuse to her father and stepmother. To her horror, Ronway cold-heartedly turns his back, merely telling the abusive maid not to go too far. As the door slams shut, Penora realizes her pleas for help were ignored time and time again after that. Ronway would only scowl, treating her desperate cries as nothing more than annoying troublemaking. Back in the present, the ailing butler asks his mistress what business brings her to his home. Penora puts on a convincing performance, looking deeply distressed over the head butler's poor health. She sweet-talks the butler, claiming she simply couldn't ignore the suffering of such a loyal family servant. Her gentle concern visibly moves the weak and elderly Ronway. Ronway is deeply touched by her visit, assuring her that he has recovered well. Penora offers a warm smile as she begins to unpack a special gift from her basket. She presents a basket of fresh, rare poplar fruits which sparkle with an enticing golden glow. While poplar fruit is highly nutritious, it is deadly poison for anyone suffering from Gustav's disease. Ronway happily takes a bite, praising its freshness as Penora smiles with secret malice. Penora encourages the butler to eat his fill, insisting he shouldn't hold back. With a deceptively warm smile, she serves him another piece of the toxic delicacy. She recalls that Gustav's disease remained completely incurable during this period of her past life. Knowing Ronway is destined to die from the illness anyway, she accelerates his inevitable fate. The clueless butler gratefully finishes the fruit, completely unaware of its lethal side effects. Penora laughs off his gratitude, knowing her deadly plan is working flawlessly. She resolutely decides she will continue visiting him to ensure his demise is swiftly guaranteed. A sudden, powerful burst of energy echoes through the quiet forest clearing. Panting heavily in the woods, Penora clutches her aching arm as she struggles to control her power. She falls to the ground in pain, her body failing to withstand the intense holy energy. Despite the agonizing physical toll, she acknowledges that this sacred magic is an indispensable weapon. Staring at a shattered tree stump, Penora resolves that subtle schemes are far superior to raw strength. Back at the estate, Penora quietly reviews a letter regarding the head butler's failing health. The written report confirms that Ronway's physical state has rapidly declined just as she planned. She folds the letter with a sense of triumph, realizing the poplar fruit has done its job. She breathes a quiet sigh, realizing it is time to put the next phase of her plan into motion. Penora approaches her maid Cecil to inquire about her stepmother's departure time for the upcoming royal event. Cecil confirms the departure time, prompting Penora to prepare for the grand evening ahead. Today's the day of the prestigious king's birthday banquet, the perfect stage for her next move. Holding a brilliant crimson gemstone, Penora smiles, determined to seek out a highly influential individual at the event. Crowds cheer enthusiastically as the crowned king waves regally from his royal balcony. Guests gather in the lavishly decorated hall, whispering praises of the sovereign's impressive presence. Penora notes that despite his age, the king still maintains a robust warrior-like physique. She inwardly critiques him as a ruler who prioritizes battle over the well-being of his citizens. Standing beside the throne are the prominent nobles of House Andrus, the military foundation of the nation. Scanning the crowded ballroom, Penora searches intently for her true target. Her eyes lock onto a young, scarred man standing amidst the distinguished guests. She recognizes the scarred youth as the eldest son, knowing his younger brother must be nearby. Nearby, a young noblewoman suddenly begins to cough violently, drawing concern from those around her. Seizing the perfect opportunity, Panora approaches the distressed lady with an air of pure concern. 3 young noblewomen whisper anxiously near a window, with one crying about her fear of running into someone. The woman in green gently inquires about the broken engagement, which the weeping lady sadly confirms. Panora listens closely as the distressed noblewoman recounts how her violent former fiancé physically abused her like a beast. Walking away, Panora quietly notes this gossip, piecing together the scandalous truth behind the broken engagement. Footsteps echo as Panora deduces that the abused woman's former fiancé must be hiding in a secluded spot. Searching for her target, Panora navigates the palace corridor, seeking out a quiet, low-traffic area. Her steps lead her toward an unused, quiet staircase where someone might seek refuge. Dark banner of House Andres looms as rumor spreads of their fearsome, beast-like nature. Panora knows the Andres family are battle fanatics, making it natural for society to exaggerate rumors about them. Panora gasps in surprise as she spots a young man with wavy orange hair sitting on the stairs. With a knowing smile, Panora reminds herself that sensational rumors are rarely entirely accurate. The orange-haired youth sits quietly, absent-mindedly dangling a golden necklace from his fingers. Surprised by her presence, Carl awkwardly claims he is merely sitting there because he has nothing to do. Carl beams cheerfully, explaining that he was simply playing with his necklace to pass the time. Scratching his neck sheepishly, Carl maintains his polite, easygoing demeanor in front of Panora. Panora directly asks if he is hiding because of his former fiancé, catching Carl completely off guard. Carl laughs off the question, admitting his broken engagement is his own fault. Observing his bright expression, Panora notes to herself that Carl's friendly smile remains completely unchanged. Carl politely asks Panora if she approached him because she needed something from him. Panora hesitates for a moment as Carl gazes up at her, waiting for her answer. Carl stares in bewilderment as Panora boldly claims that she is looking for a dog. Stunned, Carl asks if she truly brought a pet to the formal royal banquet and lost it. Carl warmly offers to help search for the pet, but Panora firmly rejects his assistance. Panora displays a sweet, charming smile as she prepares to deliver her true message. Panora describes the dog she wants as one that is obedient and excellent at hunting. Taking a deliberate step forward, Panora closes the physical distance between them with quiet intensity. Amidst a dreamy floral backdrop, Panora locks eyes with him and explicitly names Carl Andres. A dark shadow looms over high society, marking a tense transition in Panora's bold pursuit of her goal. Panora smiles slyly, clarifying to Carl Andros that he is the loyal dog she is searching for. Completely flustered, Carl points to himself in disbelief, sweating under her intense gaze. Panora smoothly offers the alternative title of servant if he finds being called a dog too offensive. Carl scratches his head, utterly confused and asking if her strange offer is some sort of metaphor. Carl's dense response about playing fetch leaves Panora completely speechless as she stares at him in silence. A sharp flashback triggers as Carl's red eye widens upon hearing the significant name of Europa. Sudden shock paralyzes Carl as the weight of her proposal shifts the playful atmosphere into dead seriousness. Panora calmly promises that she can obtain the legendary Europa necklace for him. Carl stares at her in shocked hope, desperately asking if she truly knows where it is. With an alluring, confident smirk, Panora assures him that she is willing to give it to him. The scene shifts to a past memory where a younger Panora sits quietly among the garden bushes. Suddenly, a mysterious hand in a dark uniform drops a small pouch right beside her, catching her off guard. Panora gasps as she spots the beautifully tied pouch lying quietly on the soft grass before her. Panora picks up the pouch and calls out in a panic, trying to stop the departing stranger. Panora recognizes his distinctive red cloak as the prestigious uniform worn by the kingdom's legendary knightly order. Hurrying over, Panora politely calls out and holds the dropped pouch out to the young knight. Carl accepts the pouch with a sheepish thank you, wondering how it managed to slip from his pocket. Panora watches him with a look of sheer bewilderment, realizing how incredibly clumsy this noble knight is. Carl sighs, explaining he lost a far more valuable item, prompting Panora to suggest retracing his steps. Carl admits he walked all the way from the mansion's annex, leaving Panora completely dumbfounded by his determination. Carl panics, explaining the lost necklace was for his niece and his sister will kill him if it's gone. Panora tries to soothe him, but Carl hysterically insists his sister is entirely capable of carrying out that threat. Orange-haired Carl covers his mouth and wonders what to do, while purple-haired Panora watches him with concern. Carl is anxious about his lost expensive necklace, prompting Panora to earnestly suggest they search for it together. Against a twilight forest sky, Carl's voice rings out with heartfelt gratitude for her helpful proposal. Carl bows deeply in sincere appreciation, promising to remember her kindness as a flustered Panora downplays her help. Beaming warmly, Carl introduces himself as the third son of the Marquisate of Andres and offers his future assistance. Panora gasps in quiet shock, immediately recognizing his terrifying family name and the dark rumors surrounding them. Sighting another knight in the distance, Carl apologetically bids her farewell, noting he must depart ahead. Carl waves goodbye with a smile, while Panora reflects on how excessively he went on to repay her small favor. Recalling his overwhelming loyalty, Panora smiles softly to herself, confident that she can fully place her trust in him. Back in the present, Carl eagerly asks her if she truly knows the whereabouts of the legendary Europa. Before continuing the negotiation, Carl pauses to inquire about her name and noble house. Panora curtsies gracefully, introducing herself as Panora Celsius, while Carl demands proof of her claims about Europa. Panora reveals that she knows the sacred relic's secret identity is none other than a golden ball earring. Carl gasps in utter shock as she accurately describes the true hidden form of Europa. Panora stands resolutely as Carl recovers his composure, remembering that Europa holds the power to manipulate time itself. The legend of the artifact flashes by, illustrating its mythical ability to grant eternal life to its bearer. Watching him intently, Panora recalls that Carl's past desperate search for the relic became a famous noble rumor. Carl looks at her with intense, hopeful eyes, desperately asking if she is truly willing to give it to him. Carl passionately declares that he absolutely must have the relic, prompting Panora to ask if his desire is truly that immense. Looking away thoughtfully, Panora notes that his desperation is completely natural given his tragic family history. Panora reflects on the grim fate of House Andrus, whose members are cursed to pass away at a tragically young age. Whispering nobles spread rumors of the bloodthirsty family who were said to find their ultimate pleasure only in violent warfare. Staring at Carl, Panora silently questions if he is also bound to that same savage, battle-hungry nature. Panora gently suggests that Carl could lead a long, peaceful life if he simply chose to abandon the path of conflict. Kara looks downcast, somberly stating that she clearly understands the heavy burden of Andra's plot. Terrified by her words, Carl panics and asks if her condition is for him to never fight again, which she quickly denies. Panora delivers her real shocking condition, repeating that her search is solely for an obedient dog. Holding a hand to her chest, Panora promises to hand over Europa on her 18th birthday if he accepts her bizarre pact. Carl touches his chin thoughtfully, contemplating the highly unusual nature of her proposed arrangement. Hesitating, Carl takes a sudden step forward, wanting to ask one final question before sealing their promise. Carl leans in close, invading Panora's personal space and leaving her completely speechless. Feeling his sudden proximity, Panora becomes visibly flustered and wonders why he is standing so close. Carl whispers close to her, calling her name as a tense silence falls over the staircase. Carl looks deep into her eyes, solemnly asking if she will truly keep her word if he becomes her loyal dog. Panora meets his gaze, wondering if his intense skepticism stems from her delicate, gentle appearance. Standing her ground firmly, Panora looks back at him and gives a resolute, unwavering confirmation. Hearing her firm answer, a wave of profound relief washes over Panora's face. Carl breaks into a bright, joyful smile, declaring that she does not seem like someone who would ever lie to him. Beaming with childlike excitement, Carl enthusiastically pledges his absolute loyalty to Lady Panora from this day forward. Panora sweat drops, utterly dumbfounded by how incredibly easily the young man believed her words. She looks at his cheerful face, marveling at how much faster her persuasion succeeded than she had originally anticipated. Panora explains that ancient wars were waged for centuries over such sacred relics, putting their deal into historical perspective. Smiling warmly, Carl declares that obtaining it in just a few years makes any level of submission completely worthwhile. Panora officially seals their alliance, welcoming Carl as her secret comrade on this dangerous journey. Her expression turns stern as she demands to test his absolute sincerity before they proceed any further. After telling her to call him Carl, he listens carefully as she dictates her first strict rule of absolute secrecy. Carl readily agrees to keep their contract hidden from everyone, including his own family. Clutching her hands tightly, Panora silently admits to herself that she still cannot bring herself to fully trust him. Her gaze grows cold as she reminds herself that betrayal always strikes from the most unexpected directions. Carl remains silent, his sharp, red-eyed gaze turning serious as an unreadable expression settles over him. Panora tells Carl to view the mission as a test of their new alliance, and he readily agrees. Carl looks at her intently, eager to learn what his first official task will entail. The target is revealed as a man named Kshatri, whom Carl must challenge to a duel. When Carl asks what follows the duel, Panora calmly informs him that nothing else is required. Panora turns with a serious gaze, warning Carl that he must bear full responsibility for the duel's outcome. Carl contemplates the unfamiliar name of his opponent, repeating it to himself in quiet reflection. A dark memory reveals that Kshatri was heavily indebted from gambling, exposing his sinister true nature. Disturbed by Kshatri's cruel past, Carl turns to Panora to voice a sudden concern. Carl directly asks Panora why she chose him of all people to be her partner. Panora simply states it is because of his desperate desire to obtain the relic Europa. Carl halts her, pointing out that he had never revealed his search for Europa to anyone. Carl demands to know how she could have possibly obtained such highly classified information. Panora internally panics, realizing she made a massive slip-up by assuming his desire was common knowledge. Carl waits tensely for her explanation, catching her completely off guard. Recovering quickly, Panora puts on a pleasant smile and claims she was merely seeking the highest bidder. Panora plays it off smoothly, asking if anyone in the world would reject a sacred relic. Completely convinced by her smooth lie, Carl expresses massive relief while Panora secretly sweat drops. Panora reminds him that his prestigious family background makes him the perfect buyer. Suddenly, Carl's boots come to a sudden halt on the grandstone floor. Carl turns back, expressing concern that frequent meetings with him could ruin Panora's social reputation. Bowing dramatically, Carl loudly promises to do everything in his power to never bring her shame. Surprised by his sudden outburst, Panora quickly speaks up to reassure him. Panora warmly asserts that there is absolutely nothing shameful about standing by his side. Panora looks at him with quiet sincerity, waiting for his reaction. Carl smiles sadly, explaining how others constantly misjudge his love for combat as simple brutality. Carl clenches his fist tightly, suppressing the deep resentment of being misunderstood. Beaming self-deprecatingly, Carl confesses that he has no real friends in high society. He admits that his loneliness is the exact reason he was hiding away earlier. Panora gazes at him, asking if he is aware of her own tarnished reputation. Panora recalls the cruel whispers of the noble ladies, questioning if Carl truly deserved his violent reputation. Outside the windows, their silhouettes stand together in the brightly lit hallway. Carl looks surprised as Panora gently advises him to ignore the baseless rumors. Walking closer, Panora boldly questions what could possibly be wrong with possessing a violent nature. Panora offers a brilliant, reassuring smile that radiates absolute acceptance of who he is. Stunned by her words, Carl's red eye widens in profound, quiet awe. Standing side by side, Panora reveals her greatest motivation for partnering with him. Stepping close, Panora warmly confesses that she chose him because he is a man of his word. A somber thought crosses Panora's mind as she remembers Carl's tragic death at age 20 in her past. Walking down the grand corridor, Panora laments that she could never thank him in her previous life. Present and past align as Panora resolves to change his tragic fate this time around. Beaming with childlike happiness, Carl celebrates being granted this miraculous new opportunity. The scene shifts to the dark servants' quarters of the Celsius estate, where a lone bed sits. A bandaged man tosses and turns in bed, groaning in intense feverish pain. Panora quietly slips into the dark room, approaching the bed of the suffering servant. Standing over him, Panora softly chides him for leaving his door unlocked. Panora gazes down at him with an unreadable expression, noting how incredibly careless he is. The bandaged servant winces, trapped in the clutches of a terrible nightmare. Seizing the moment of his vulnerability, Panora decides to take action while he is incapacitated. Suddenly, a hand shoots out of the bed and violently grips her wrist. Weak but determined, the bandaged man demands to know who she is and what she is doing. Frustrated and overwhelmed, Panora curses her current predicament in silent desperation. A sudden blinding flash of magical light startles Panora, catching her completely off guard. Reviewing the manuscript, Panora notes with disappointment that none of the novel's main events are changing. Panora's thoughts are interrupted by panicked shouts of concern echoing from the corridor outside. Out in the hallway, several heavily bruised guards limp past, groaning in agonizing pain from broken bones. Clenching his aching jaw, an injured guard furiously curses the brutal strength of his mindless attacker. Watching them through her window, Panora realizes with quiet satisfaction that her chosen champion fulfilled his mission perfectly. Looking away, she concludes that the beaten opponent will be bedridden for quite some time. Holding a glowing blue crystal necklace, Panora resolves that she must personally take care of the rest. A low, ominous rumble of thunder shakes the skies above the Grand Celsius estate. During the commotion, Panora turns to her maid, questioning what is causing the noise outside. Her trusted maid, Cecil, looks away nervously, hesitating to share the troubling news. Sensing her hesitation, Panora gently pleads with Cecil to be honest with her about the situation. Cecil bows her head in submission, agreeing to inform her lady of what transpired. Panora gasps in utter horror as Cecil delivers the shocking news of Kshatri's sudden death. Bandaged and lifeless in bed, Kshatri succumbed to internal organ damage sustained during the violent martial tournament. Cecil somberly confirms that knights sometimes meet their tragic ends during these high-stakes duels. Cecil explains that the Count deems the match excessively violent and plans to sue the opponent. Panora's gaze turns cold as she recognizes the unfair power dynamic between a deceased commoner and the influential Andrus family. She calmly rationalizes that Carl's prestigious family will easily resolve the matter with a simple fine. Relieved of the immediate tension, Panora kindly dismisses Cecil so they can both get some rest. Left alone, Panora marvels at the terrifying power of the Reliquio to finish off a trained warrior. Panora settles back into her chair, her hand reaching toward a small tray of sandwiches. Taking a bite, Panora reflects on the surprisingly fierce resistance she encountered during the struggle. A chilling thought crosses her mind as she worries she nearly underestimated her opponent's strength. Looking down at her arm, she inspects several bloody scratches left behind on her wrist. Panora softly touches her wounds, grateful she only sustained minor injuries from his desperate counterattack. She worries that Cecil will eventually grow suspicious of these hidden injuries if she isn't careful. Chewing her food thoughtfully, Panora remains deeply unsettled by how easily her defense was breached. She recalls the formidable, war-torn legacy of the Andrus Marquis family ancestors. Placing her teacup down, she wonders if they passed secret lethal assassination techniques down to Carl. Wiping her mouth, Panora decides it would be wisest to secure Carl's direct assistance for her safety. Standing up from her table, she resolves to visit the ailing Ranwei first. She quietly reflects that it would be a terrible shame if she failed to see him before he dies. Gathering her gown, Panora begins walking out to check on the patient's deteriorating condition. The door opens with a quiet click as Cecil enters, surprised to find her lady preparing to leave. Standing at the balcony, Cecil confirms that Ranwei's condition has unfortunately shown no signs of improvement. Understanding her lady's intent, Cecil quickly offers to have a carriage prepared for the journey. Smiling slightly, Panora cynically contemplates bringing some cheap medicine along instead of costly treatments. Suddenly, Cecil's frantic voice echoes down the hallway, urgently calling out to Lady Panora. Hurrying over, Cecil stops in front of her lady, gasping for breath from her sudden run. Flustered and panting, Cecil nervously reports that an unexpected visitor has arrived at the mansion. Caught off guard by the sudden announcement, Panora turns to ask who has come to see her. Cecil presents a wax-sealed letter on a silver tray, leaving Panora wide-eyed with shock. Outside, a handsome black-haired young man named Erican stands tall into the bright blue sky. Panora hastily makes her way down the grand stairs to greet the unexpected guest. Erican coolly dismisses any need for hospitality, stating that his stay will be incredibly brief. Panora stares at him in stunned silence, completely surprised by his sudden appearance. Meeting her gaze with a subtle smile, Erican confidently announces that he has come to take her with him. Turning to the estate staff, Erican politely asks him to leave so he can speak with Panora in private. Outside the grand iron gates, Panora and Erican stand together as whispering onlookers watch from a distance. Panora looks up in sudden shock as Erican questions her surprise reaction. Panora remembers proposing a strategic, contract-based engagement to Erican in her past attempt. Erican steps closer, asking if she too had been waiting for this arrangement. Erican smiles softly, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Placing a hand on his chest, Erican warmly thanks Panora for successfully treating his father. A wax-sealed proposal letter rests quietly, finalizing their formal arrangement. Erican bows deeply and kisses Panora's hand, officially declaring himself her fiancé. Panora offers a polite smile, internally marveling at how easily everything fell into place. Panora secretly rejoices, realizing this new engagement allows her to finally escape Naberius. Erican gently takes her hand, requesting that she accompany him to meet his father. Panora looks back at him with wide, startled eyes at his sudden request. Panora nervously clutches her dress, asking if they must depart this very instant. The two stand in an awkward, silent standoff, holding hands in comical bewilderment. Panora looks exasperated, internally complaining about Erican's incredibly unpredictable and spontaneous nature. Leading her inside, Erican explains that his father's health has remained highly unstable. Erican looks somber, admitting his father is still delirious and needs her help. Panora listens intently, her expression turning serious as she processes his words. Erican crosses his arms with a confident grin, playfully teasing that his fiancé should naturally assist. Putting on a sweet facade, Panora readily agrees to help him. Peering through the carriage window, Panora reflects on her first arrival at the St. Paul estate. The horse-drawn carriage rolls majestically through the villa's imposing iron gates. A quiet anticipation builds as they arrive at the secluded villa where Duke Sarli is recuperating. Panora steps outside, utterly awed by the breathtaking grandeur of the massive estate. Erican turns around abruptly, startled to find her already out of the carriage. Erican looks concerned, questioning why she stepped out without waiting for her escort. Panora looks away sheepishly as Erican chides her for such careless behavior. Panora clutches her dress and laughs it off, claiming she is simply too used to being alone. Erican sighs quietly, accepting her explanation with a resigned look. The scene shifts inside to a quiet library corridor as they proceed further. Seated in the drawing room, Erican reviews the list, asking if these purchases will suffice. Panora sips her tea gracefully, confirming that the treatment combination is surprisingly simple. Panora's expression darkens as she warns that a full recovery will still be difficult. Erican holds his teacup, hoping that the treatment will at least cease his father's coughing. Erican's golden eyes turn sharp and intense as he demands to know the exact name of his father's illness. Panora freezes in silent panic, caught completely off guard by his sudden interrogation. Panora's eyes narrow as she quickly calculates her response to avoid suspicion. Clattering her cup onto the saucer, Panora realizes she made a critical error by omitting the disease's name. An oppressive, heavy silence descends upon the room as they stare at one another. Erican's gaze grows freezing cold, threatening to call off the engagement if she's a fraud. Erican leans forward, sternly warning her that his patience is running thin. Panora remains silent for a tense moment, maintaining her composure under his intense glare. Panora calmly lies, claiming she acquired her medical info from a group of wandering people. Pulling out her prepared notes, Panora adds that she kept detailed records of the cure. Erican's sharp golden eye narrows, deeply skeptical of her convenient explanation. Panora meets his intense gaze unflinchingly, firmly confirming her story. Panora boldly names the mysterious epidemic as the cough of agony to satisfy his query. Panora secretly sweat drops, incredibly relieved that she had prepared this precise lie in advance. Panora recalls reading about Gustav's disease, knowing a precise explanation would expose what she did to Ranwei. Regaining her confidence, Panora successfully redirects his focus by highlighting the treatment's obvious efficacy. Aroken muses on Panora's sheer audacity, fascinated that she dared challenge his household using mere rumors. He stares at Panora with growing intrigue, deeply impressed by her quiet composure and formidable confidence. Panora calmly requests that Aroken keep their conversation a strict secret between them. She sighs softly, explaining that rumors associating her with common wanderers would create unnecessary trouble. Aroken chuckles in response, finding her careful calculation and social anxieties highly amusing. He candidly admits that he never expected to find himself engaged to a fortune teller. Panora narrows her eyes in silent calculation, keeping her guard up around the sharp-witted young noble. Breaking the silence, Panora directly asks Aroken why he has not questioned her choice of fiancé. Aroken stands up and dismisses her query, rationalizing that seeking a more powerful partner is simply natural. He stops by the couch, pausing thoughtfully as he prepares to make another point. Leaning in close, Aroken smugly notes that his father's critical illness served as her perfect leverage. Nora looks up in surprise, quietly questioning his definition of leverage but dismissing it as unimportant. A heavy, silent tension hangs in the air between them as their mutual schemes align. Aroken smirks coldly, asserting his belief that one must secure desired goals by any means necessary. Suddenly pulling her close, Aroken points out that they are remarkably alike in their ruthless methods. He smiles gently, warmly musing that they might actually make a highly compatible husband and wife. Suddenly, a weak voice interrupts them as Aroken's bedridden father, Duke Sarlia, opens his eyes. Aroken instantly drops to his knees in deep relief, tears of joy filling his eyes at his father's awakening. Panora watches the tender scene in astonishment, realizing Aroken looks like a completely different person. She looks on with wide eyes, quietly reflecting on his words about how alike they truly are. Panora quickly collects her thoughts, preparing to present her facade to the newly awakened Duke. Duke Sarlia looks up weakly, questioning his son about the identity of the young lady beside him. Panora bows with perfect grace, politely introducing herself as Panora to the recovering Duke. Aroken lies smoothly, claiming she traveled all this way just to pray for his father's recovery. Touched by the gesture, the Duke warmly encourages Panora to remain close friends with his son. Aroken's expression turns serious as he prepares to reveal their true arrangement to his father. The Duke gasps and coughs in shock as Aroken reveals Panora is far more than a friend. Aroken gently holds Panora close, confidently declaring her as the woman he intends to make his wife. Panora freezes in utter shock, completely blindsided by his sudden public proposal to his father. When the Duke questions the sudden match, Aroken calmly promises to explain everything in due order. Smiling gently, Aroken politely asks Panora to wait outside for a moment while he speaks with his father. Outside in the grand glass pavilion, Panora stands with Aroken as they review their successful progress. Aroken walks beside her with a soft smile, expressing genuine gratitude that his father survived the illness. He assures her that persuading his father will be easy, asking her to leave the matter to him. Looking at her warmly, Aroken offers to initiate their engagement procedures immediately if she desires. Panora is caught completely off guard, her eyes widening as she tries to process the rapid pace. She looks at him with growing suspicion, wondering if his high spirits are entirely due to his father's recovery. Aroken suggests holding the ceremony this summer, asking her for her input on the dress and venue. Panora looks down indifferently, coldly stating she has no opinions and will leave everything to him. Her highly formal tone catches Aroken off guard, causing a brief flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Aroken warns her that using such distant formal titles might make her former fiancé grow highly suspicious. He leans in dangerously close, trapping her against the stone table to reassert his presence. Meeting his intense gaze unflinchingly, Panora directly asks how he expects her to address him. Smiling softly, Aroken tells her to call him simply Aroken with nothing more added to it. Looking away, Panora silently acknowledges that she cannot bring herself to trust him completely. She stands beside him in the breezy garden, deciding that her lack of trust is ultimately irrelevant. A cunning smile crosses her face as she resolves to use any means to make her revenge succeed. Looking out over the grand estate, Panora vows she will gladly join hands with anyone for her vengeance. Returning late to her family's mansion, Panora is immediately confronted by a displeased Nibirius. Nibirius furiously scolds her, complaining that her late-night absences are severely damaging their family's dignity. Panora looks down gloomily, quietly wondering if her actions have only served to hasten Nibirius's impending doom. Nibirius stares coldly at the carriage outside, deeply resentful of her sudden and unannounced return. Standing in the courtyard under the night sky, Nibirius angrily demands that she break her silence and speak. Lowering her gaze, Panora meekly begs for his forgiveness to maintain her submissive and harmless facade. Panora defends her late return by claiming she never anticipated being summoned so suddenly by the young Duke. Nibirius's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as she casually drops Aroken's name, mentioning she visited his private villa. Completely dumbfounded, Nibirius demands confirmation, struggling to comprehend why she would associate with the powerful Duke of the North. Panora calmly reveals her grand plan, shocking him further with the news of her upcoming engagement to Aroken. Passing by him without another word, Panora leaves Nibirius utterly frozen and speechless in the courtyard. She bids him a cold farewell, leaving a heavily trembling Nibirius to process the shocking news of her engagement. A heavy, exhausted sigh escapes Panora as she walks away, leaving Nibirius standing alone in the distant courtyard. Panora suddenly freezes in surprise, her eyes widening as she spots someone unexpected waiting for her. Her father, the Count, stands tall and imposing in the grand hallway, greeting her with a stern and cold demeanor. Bowing respectfully, Panora wonders if her father's rare presence is due to concern for his own son. Panora politely informs him that she has just returned home, trying to keep her composure before his cold gaze. Without offering a single warm word, the Count walks past her with complete, freezing indifference. Panora watches her father's retreating back with silent resignation, accustomed to his absolute coldness. Turning away from the grand staircase, Panora dismisses her hurt feelings, telling herself it is of no consequence. Walking up the stairs, she hollowly reflects that such cold treatment is nothing new to her anyway. Inside her dressing room, Cecil quietly brushes Panora's long hair as they prepare for the day. Cecil hesitatingly brings up the topic of Panora's upcoming birthday banquet, preparing to share a critical piece of news. She reveals that the Count plans to officially announce Panora's engagement to Lord Orokin during the grand banquet. Looking at her reflection, Panora calmly accepts the news and instructs Cecil to convey her assent without issue. Panora sighs deeply, bitterly noting her father's immense selfishness in confirming the engagement only when it suits him. She reflects on her impending social debut, realizing today might be her very last chance to visit Wanwei. Standing up abruptly, Panora decisively instructs Cecil that she intends to visit Ranwei this very day. Cecil remains silent, her face clouded with deep concern and sorrow as she looks down. Panora calls her name in confusion, prompting a startled gasp from Cecil as she snaps back to reality. Panora gently asks her faithful maid if she is feeling unwell, noticing her unusually tense behavior. She clutches her hands together tightly in nervous hesitation before finally summoning the courage to speak. Looking up with a heavily troubled expression, Cecil confesses that there's one question she desperately needs to ask. An expectant silence fills the grand dressing room as the two women stand facing each other. Cecil anxiously asks if this path is truly safe, and Panora firmly reassures her that everything is fine. Cecil looks away with a sweat drop, still deeply worried about the dangerous secrets surrounding them. Panora gazes back at her quietly, waiting for her loyal maid to fully voice her inner thoughts. Cecil reflects on her 5 years of dedicated service, remembering her initial vow to remain strictly professional. She recalls her past determination to treat the estate solely as a workplace and never form personal bonds. Shifting her gaze nervously, Cecil remembers how her cold resolve began to falter over time. She envisions Panora as a radiant, gentle soul, admitting she couldn't help but see her as entirely different from other nobles. Cecil points out that Ranwei has devoted himself to their household since childhood, pleading for her mercy. Turning around with fierce conviction, Panora passionately declares that she could never ignore such deep and unwavering devotion. Cecil stares back at her, completely stunned and deeply moved by Panora's unexpected outburst of raw emotion. Panora shifts the conversation, reminding Cecil of the suspiciously frequent accidents that have occurred of late. She explains that these chaotic events have ironically granted her much-needed time to quietly reflect and think. Cecil recalls the stern and severe former maid Seal, who was involved in those past accidents. Panora sadly notes that Seal is always insincere and had never shown her a single ounce of genuine kindness. Turning back to Cecil, Panora emphasizes that despite everything, Seal was still the only one constantly by her side. Smiling warmly and softly, Panora admits she was still deeply grateful to have had Seal near her. Cecil's eyes soften with profound emotion, touched by Panora's incredible capacity for gratitude and kindness. She remembers the terrifying moment the grand chandelier crashed down, leaving the entire household deeply shaken and terrified. Clenching her green dress tightly, Panora reflects on when her perspective began to truly shift. Panora gently reminds Cecil of the importance of expressing gratitude to those who are still with them. Cecil looks away with a heavy heart, silently wishing for someone to act in her place. Cecil steps into the bustling kitchen as the brown-bearded chef looks up in surprise at her entrance. Chef questions Cecil's presence, prompting her to explain that their young mistress has already gone out. The chef notes that Panora's sudden absences have become increasingly frequent as of late. The chef reacts in shock upon learning that Panora has gone to visit the ailing head butler. Chef expresses doubt, bringing up rumors of the young lady's harsh treatment of her servants. Observing her somber mood, the chef asks Cecil if she is holding up all right. Cecil warmly defends her mistress, explaining that Panora has only ever treated her with genuine kindness. He surprises the chef by sharing how Panora thoughtfully gave her time to rest. Cecil somberly urges him to trust the warnings left by their former colleague, Seal. The chef thoughtfully considers her words, admitting there may be more to the story than rumors suggest. The chef quietly ponders the situation, adjusting his perspective on their mysterious young mistress. Shifting his perspective, the chef admits that Panora might actually be a genuinely good person after all. Meanwhile, a grand carriage rolls smoothly down the stone streets, carrying Panora to her secret destination. Inside the carriage, Panora is deeply troubled, wondering why Cecil suddenly questioned her motives today. She crosses her arms in frustration, feeling the mounting pressure of keeping her true plans hidden. Looking out the window, Panora admits to herself how exhausting it is to constantly fabricate excuses. The carriage finally arrives in a modest village where Panora steps out under watchful eyes. A local elder greets Panora warmly, directing her toward the room where her companion resides. Nodding politely, Panora hurries past him and heads straight toward the humble dwelling. Panora opens the door with a bright smile, announcing she has brought fresh fruit for Ranwei. Inside, a fragile elderly Ranwei is overcome by a sudden violent fit of coughing on his bed. Hurrying to his side, Panora supports the frail man as a harsh cough shakes his weak body. With deep concern, Panora gently supports him and asks if he's holding up all right. Looking around the dusty, neglected room, Panora realizes with dismay that Ranwei has been left entirely alone. Ranwei weakly tries to push her away, warning her to keep her distance from his illness. Panora reassures him gently, insisting she is perfectly fine and has visited him many times before. Ranwei reluctantly accepts her comfort, his face etched with exhaustion and gratitude. He laments that despite the doctor's reassurances, everyone else is too terrified to even approach him. Panora's heart breaks as she listens to how isolated and abandoned he has become. Ranwei looks down in deep shame, tearfully apologizing for showing her such a pathetic state. His eyes widen slightly as he feels a sudden warmth disrupt his dark, lonely thoughts. Panora offers him a bright, cheering smile, pulling a fresh pear from her basket to share. Sitting beside him, she casually mentions how lovely the weather is to ease his troubled mind. She reaches out and pulls back the heavy, dark curtains to let the sunlight in. Panora opens the window, hoping the fresh summer breeze will help soothe his persistent coughing. Bathed in the warm morning light, Ranwei stares at her, deeply moved by her angelic kindness. Turning back with a soft smile, Panora asks if the fresh air makes him feel any better. Her smile fades into concern when Ranwei remains silent, staring at her with wide eyes. Panora freezes in surprise as she notices a sudden shift in his quiet demeanor. Silent tears begin to spill over Ranwei's worn cheeks, catching her completely off guard. Overwhelmed by a sudden emotional display, Panora gently asks why he is crying. Ranwei weakly tries to wipe his tears away, deeply touched by her presence. Bowing his head, the elderly butler tearfully expresses his profound gratitude for her warmth. He reveals that she is the sole person who has not abandoned him in his final days. A brief title screen marks a quiet transition as the emotional weight of his words settles in. Ranwei somberly confesses that the doctor expects him not to survive past the summer. Nora gasps in dismay as Ranwei adds that the physicians still cannot determine the cause of his illness. Looking down at his frail body, the elderly white-haired Ranwei laments how much he has wasted away. Ranwei clenches his fist in bitter anguish, tearfully recounting how his own family abandoned him in his sickness. Nora listens quietly as the elderly butler bitterly notes how cruelly he is being treated because of his impending death. Panora gently touches Ranwei's back, softly urging him to calm down before he collapses from exhaustion. Panora reflects on how deeply Ranwei's suppressed pain and resentment must have been building up over the years. Looking closely, Panora coldly reflects that despite his immense suffering, Ranwei's miserable state is entirely self-inflicted. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Panora contemplates the tragedy of the situation with silent detachment. Ranwei suddenly bows his head deeply in a submissive gesture of profound apology. Panora's eyes widen in shock as the butler tearfully apologizes for never being of any help to her. A bittersweet memory of her father surfaces as Ranwei wishes he had reached out to support her in the past. Leaning in, Panora gently comforts the weeping old man, softly telling him not to cry. Ranwei laments that even the Count and Countess completely ignored him, never bothering to visit his sickbed. With tears streaming down his face, Ranwei bitterly regrets keeping his mouth shut for so long. Looking up desperately, Ranwei asks Panora why she is being so kind to someone as pathetic as him. Panora remains silent, her face half-shadowed as she processes his desperate question. Placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, Panora softly entreats him to stop speaking such painful words. Panora sadly looks down, gently questioning him about the Celsius family. The two sit quietly in the humble room, sharing a rare moment of mutual vulnerability. Panora shifts the conversation, casually mentioning that her birthday party is approaching. Smiling softly while holding a piece of fruit, Panora admits she's nervous about her very first celebration. "I'm just a language model and can't help with that." Panora looks ahead with quiet anticipation, noting that her grand debut into society will take place next year. Ranwei reacts with quiet melancholy, softly acknowledging her upcoming entrance into the noble world. Ranwei tentatively asks Panora if she has secured an influential lady to sponsor her debut. Panora turns to him, clarifying if he means a noblewoman who guides a young lady's social debut. Lowering her head, Panora forces a bitter, melancholic smile, admitting she has no such sponsor. An elegant flashback illustrates the prestigious guidance noble girls typically receive from influential high society ladies. Young noble girls gather in joyous admiration, reflecting the immense honor a high society sponsor brings. Panora looks down somberly, noting that a mother is usually the one who secures such a prestigious sponsor. Panora grimly reflects that her stepmother, who actively plots her death, would never help her find one. Ranwei looks up with sudden determination, revealing he knows an acquaintance who might agree to sponsor her. Panora freezes in absolute shock, her eyes widening at the butler's unexpected offer. Ranwei warmly offers to reach out to his acquaintance to request her crucial assistance for the debutante. Ranwei asks Panora if she's familiar with the renowned Countess Mikhail. Panora confirms with quiet surprise that she has indeed heard of the powerful noblewoman. Panora recalls that Countess Mikhail is a highly influential figure whose younger brother serves as the high priest. A harsh, sudden cough shakes Ranwei's frail frame as he explains his health has prevented recent contact. Ranwei weakly declares his hope that the Countess will grant him this one final wish before he passes. Panora looks at him with deep emotion, softly calling his name in concern. With an earnest expression, Ranwei insists on doing everything in his power to help her in his remaining days. A violent, hacking cough suddenly racks Ranwei's weak chest, interrupting his passionate declaration. Watching him suffer, Panora wears a chillingly calm, dark smile as her hidden plans fall into place. She remembers how the cold and harsh noble society utterly ignores the pleas of the weak and helpless. Clenching her hand tightly, Panora bitterly notes that there are very few fools left in this cruel world. Panora looks out the window, her expression hardening as she prepares for the trials ahead. Meanwhile, high society gossip begins to stir as noblewomen in the bustling city discuss a shocking rumor. In a luxurious parlor, 3 noblewomen eagerly gossip about a scandalous rejection that occurred at a recent ball. They whisper about how the season's top groom candidate firmly rejected a match, claiming he had already proposed to his true love. A lady signed dramatic lament, discussing the tragic waste of such a highly coveted groom. A blonde nobleman walks away in the background as the gossipers whisper about the identity of his mysterious partner. Overhearing gossip about Panora Celsius, a young man stops in surprise as he reaches for a fabric bowl. Naberius spins around in disbelief, demanding to know exactly what the gossiping noblewoman just said. Watching from her high window, Panora listens as her maid announces that an unexpected guest awaits outside. Below the estate gates, Naberius stands impatiently by a carriage while a butler asks what he wishes to do. Indoors, Pandora clenches her fist, instantly realizing Naberius must have heard about her sudden engagement to Orokin. Frowning, Panora is deeply annoyed by his sudden, unannounced arrival at her family's estate. She bitterly recalls Naberius' past hostility, making his furious reaction to her engagement completely nonsensical to her. Looking down at him from her room, Panora intensely wonders what his true intentions are today. Outside, Naberius aggressively barks at the bowing maid, demanding she bring Panora out immediately. He continues yelling furiously, refusing to believe the excuse that Panora is too unwell to see him. Hearing his loud, disruptive scene from inside, Panora finally decides to step out and confront him. Standing at the entrance, Panora calls out Naberius' name to stop his rude behavior towards her staff. Panora gently dismisses her stressed maid, Cecil, telling her she can return inside, while Cecil sighs in relief. Walking down the path with a dark expression, Panora fumes over how poorly he treated her loyal maid. Naberius arrogantly scoffs at her, mocking her supposed illness now that she is standing right before him. Panora weakly feigns a fever, politely explaining that she had been sleeping all day due to her sickness. Naberius asks skeptically if her excuse is true, and Panora lies with a delicate cough to maintain her act. Dismissing her illness, Naberius loudly demands to know if she understands why he rushed here so frantically. He points an accusing finger, aggressively questioning why the prestigious house of Zariar would ever propose to her. Desperate and humiliated, Naberius complains that her engagement makes him look like a total fool to society. He looks down at her suspiciously, demanding to know if she was secretly seeing the Duke all along. Panora stares back at his desperate outburst with a chillingly cold, completely unimpressed expression. She darkly recalls past urges to destroy both Naberius and Howlus, barely holding back from slapping him. Hiding her malice, Panora offers a sweet, serene smile and gently tells Naberius there has been a misunderstanding. Naberius stands completely bewildered by her calm response as she firmly reiterates her peaceful stance. Panora steps closer and directly clarifies that they never actually shared a romantic relationship of any kind. Panora questions why he acts betrayed, causing a red-faced Naberius to sputter in defensive, outraged confusion. Panora delivers a blunt reality check, flatly asking Naberius if she has ever once confessed love to him. Her cold, piercing words strike Naberius dumb, leaving him completely silent and unable to find a response. Looking down in defeat, Naberius weakly admits he only went along with the match to appease his parents. Panora gently explains that while she felt comfortable by his side, her heart never once fluttered for him. Bathed in a warm glow, Panora dreamily smiles and declares that she has finally found her true love. Naberius is completely speechless as Panora begins to recount romantic advice her mother once gave her long ago. Resting her cheek in her hand, she dreamily describes how a true soulmate sparks an instant, undeniable connection. Panora adds that meeting Lord Orokin made her understand this feeling, while Naberius desperately asks what she understood. Clasping her hands with a bright smile, Panora crushes his hopes by proclaiming the Duke as her destined one. Naberius' mouth trembles in absolute shock and heartbreak as her devastating words sink in. Snapping with desperate denial, Naberius grabs her shoulder, frantically claiming the young lord is deceiving her. He shouts angrily, insisting that a powerful nobleman would never genuinely fall for a mere count's daughter. Panora looks away in silent, unbothered detachment, letting his desperate, bitter arguments fall flat. She calmly reaches up and brushes his desperate hand away, stating his warnings change nothing, even if true. Looming over him with a chilling, cold gaze, Panora looks down at the stunned, trembling nobleman. Nibirius cowers slightly, sweat dripping down his cheek as he weakly mutters her name in pure disbelief. Softening her expression, Panora gently apologizes, softly adding that she knows he is a good person at heart. Clinging to her kind words, Nibirius smiles hopefully, pleading with her to leave the Duke and choose him. Nibirius' eyes widen in sudden shock as a chilling realization begins to pierce through his hopeful delusion. He stands frozen in dread as she reveals that his feelings were actually the ones gradually drifting away. Wearing a cold, knowing smile, Panora softly suggests that parting ways now is actually for the best. Turning away, Panora gracefully walks back inside, leaving him with the parting wish that he find someone more suited. Left completely crushed and alone, Nibirius walks back toward his carriage under the watchful eye of his driver. Nibirius' driver asks if his conversation went well, but the crestfallen blonde nobleman remains completely silent. Snapping out of his daze when addressed, Nibirius mutters a distracted, nervous confirmation to his driver. Boarding his carriage, Nibirius bitterly blames Orokin for forcing the match, dismissing the northern nobles as absolute savages. Leaning heavily against the rattling carriage wall, Nibirius is tormented by the painful realization that she never loved him. Tormented by regret, he clutches his head in despair as the carriage rolls on, wondering how everything went so wrong. A loud crash echoes inside the carriage as a furious Nibirius violently stomps his foot in absolute frustration. Gritting his teeth in deep resentment, Nibirius growls the name of his romantic rival, Orokin Zarier. Nibirius maliciously assumes Orokin is using Panora, predicting her inevitable ruin, while Panora remains slumped on her bedroom floor. A nearby clock strikes midnight just as a sudden gasp of pain breaks the quiet room. Sitting by dim candlelight, Panora winces and nurses her pricked finger, regretting her decision to sew in the dark. The grandfather clock chimes loudly in the quiet room, signaling the transition into the late-night hours. Panora picks up a densely written manuscript page, searching for secrets hidden within the original novel's text. Scanning the document intently, Panora sighs in frustration as she finds no immediately useful information within the pages. Suddenly, her purple eyes widen in shock as she spots a crucial detail she had previously overlooked. Her breath catches in her throat as she stares at the text, completely stunned by her discovery. The novel describes a fateful spring encounter where the Duke's son, Orokin, first appeared before a woman named Visago. Panora realizes with a jolt that today must be the very day Visago and Orokin were destined to meet. Though it seems natural for them to cross paths, the memory of their first official meeting plays out in her mind. In the past, the blue-haired woman had gently questioned if the Northern Lord was adjusting well to the room's warmth. Smiling politely, the dark-haired nobleman playfully interprets her polite concern as a subtle hint for him to leave. Staring at the text, Panora wonders why Visago was so hostile, questioning if they belonged to opposing political factions. Panora recalls that Orokin's name was prominently listed in the original novel section reserved for crucial main characters. Dipping her pen, she begins drafting a letter, scheming about the potential consequences of their fated acquaintance. A calculating smile plays on her lips as she realizes she can use Orokin to get closer to Visago. From outside the balcony, Panora calls out to her maid, Cecil, to attend to her. Cecil enters with a tray, nervously reporting that Lord Orokin Zariar has unexpectedly arrived at the main gate. Panora facepalms in exhaustion as Cecil explains that the unexpected noble visitor is demanding an immediate audience. Fuming with annoyance, Panora complains about his complete lack of boundaries and his persistent failure to send advance warning. Standing by his carriage, Orokin greets her with a playful smile, teasing her about a usual habit of making him wait. Orokin easily reads her annoyed expression, prompting her to bluntly confirm she wants to know his reason for visiting. Orokin smiles charmingly, casually mentioning that he heard his lovely fiancé's birthday is rapidly approaching. Panora points to herself in confusion, while Orokin, tilting his head, asks if his information is somehow incorrect. Stepping closer, Orokin smoothly notes that he is fully aware she has absolutely no special plans scheduled for today. Visibly sweating, Panora admits she is having serious trouble keeping up with his sudden and confusing train of thought. Orokin clarifies his intentions, revealing he wants to discuss the dress she will be wearing to her celebration. Panora freezes in absolute shock as he casually adds that they will also be designing her engagement ceremony dress. As the carriage rolls along the sunny grassy hill, Panora's bewildered gasp of disbelief echoes from within. Panora points out that he stands to gain absolutely nothing by going through such elaborate trouble for her. Orokin gently reminds Panora that she was the one who initially requested his assistance to keep Nibirius away. Panora confirms her goal, and Orokin warns her of the severe social consequences if their fake relationship is ever exposed. Orokin explains that to avoid suspicion, they must put on a flawless and highly convincing romantic performance. A sudden slam echoes as Orokin traps Panora against the carriage wall, insisting their interactions must be far more frequent. Panora stares up in breathless surprise, completely caught off guard by his sudden, commanding proximity. Leaning in dangerously close, Orokin intensely demands that she say his name out loud. Trembling slightly, Panora weakly mutters his full name, Orokin Zariar, under his intense, mesmerizing gaze. Orokin facepalms in pure exasperation, leaving a thoroughly baffled Panora to utter a confused question. After Panora merely lists his status as the heir, Orokin wearisomely asks if that is truly all she thinks of him. Panora quickly squeaks out a denial as he looms over her once more inside the carriage. Panoro nervously begins listing his wealth and immense social power, desperately trying to appease him. Looking up with a tentative blush, Panoro quietly adds that he is also undeniably handsome. Orokin's golden eyes narrow with intense focus, fixing a sharp and calculating gaze forward. Letting out a playful laugh, Orokin dismisses Panora's tension as she stands silently before him inside the carriage. Panora sighs with a sweat drop, admitting she was anxiously wondering how he would respond to her. Settling back into his seat, Orokin calmly invites her to ask him whatever is on her mind. Orokin explains that she is free to invent any reason she wishes to explain their eventual split. Panora agrees, while Orokin casually adds he does not mind if she blames him entirely for the breakup. Orokin points out the social scandal if people realize he neglected his own fiance's upcoming birthday. Panoroa looks down in silent worry as Orokin reminds her of his future duty as the next duke. Leaning in closer with a charming smile, Orokin sits beside a visibly tense and wary Panora. Panora looks taken aback as Orokin asserts his firm intention to participate in all her major events. Panora internally fumes, wishing Orokin would just leave her alone once his father's life is secured. Orokin questions her surprise, asking if she expected anything less from someone playing the ideal fiancé. A soft tap sounds as Orokin rests his hand on the carriage wall, setting the conditions of their deal. Panora groans in annoyance as Orokin looms over her, his intense proximity completely overwhelming her. The carriage arrives outside a grand, elegant boutique adorned with a pink sign depicting a dress. Panora steps into the lavish boutique, feeling instantly overwhelmed by the glittering chandeliers and expensive decor. Orokin politely asks the blonde shop assistant for immediate wear options, citing his fiance's upcoming birthday. As the blonde assistant suggests a dress, Panora glances around nervously, feeling completely out of her depth. Panora silently laments that high-end boutiques rarely carry dresses in her preferred color, black. Panora sighs with disappointment over her favorite color while the shop assistant asks for her opinion. Startled by the assistant's offer to try something on, Panora quickly declines and asks to look around more. Speaking to the assistant, Orokin smoothly apologizes and notes that his lady is not particularly fond of shopping. Orokin suddenly turns around with a decisive gesture, catching the assistant's full attention. With a bright, cheerful smile, Orokin boldly commands the shop to deliver everything to her estate. The blonde assistant bows in polite agreement, leaving a completely dumbfounded Panora gasping in sheer shock. Orokin points out a specific dress, strictly demanding its delivery to her house within 4 days. Panora stares at Orokin in absolute disbelief, internally screaming at his wild and reckless extravagance. Grabbing his arm, Panora pleads with Lord Orokin, who simply reminds her to drop his formal title. Panora frantically protests, insisting she could never possibly afford to repay such a staggering sum of money. Orokin dismisses her concerns, explaining that this grand gesture is necessary to make their fake engagement convincing. Panora desperately argues that it is a massive waste of money while the assistant watches them sweatily. Orokin's golden eyes narrow slightly as he listens to her persistent protests about the cost. Orokin casually boasts that the massive sum is merely pocket change he wouldn't even notice dropping. Orokin questions the capital's perception of his family's wealth, leaving Panora completely speechless with his privilege. Sighing deeply, Orokin wonders if her reaction is northern prejudice and asks if he should apologize. Back at the estate, a maid stands in shock before a towering mountain of delivered gift boxes. Staring at the massive hoard with deadpan exhaustion, Panora weakly mutters about the endless influx of clothes. When her maid asks about another large box, Panora defeatedly guesses that it must contain shoes. Another maid bursts into the room, excitedly announcing that a carriage from the jewelry store has just arrived. Panora facepalms in pure agony, deeply regretting her decision to ever make Orokin her fake fiancé. The mansion's maids eagerly carry in more presents, marveling at the Duke's incredible generosity toward Panora. The maids swoon over the romantic gesture, gushing about a love story that beautifully transcends social status. A soft click sounds as Panora closes her bedroom door, quietly resigning herself to her chaotic fate. Leaning heavily against the wall, Panora sighs, realizing this chaos is the price of relying on a doke. Panora flops face first onto her bed, reminding herself she must endure this to secure high-ranking noble allies. Clutching her pillow, she steels her resolve to get through this until her ultimate revenge is complete. Lying in bed, Panora decides she will repay Orokin's overwhelming kindness by returning his fortune later. The scene shifts to a sunny day as colorful party banners flutter outside the grand mansion. Servants busily prepare a massive pink cake and assortments of elegant pastries for the birthday celebration. Her maid presents a beautiful dress, noting a special birthday message from the Duke was attached to it. Remembering her past life, Panora carefully selects shoes that follow the trends mentioned in her favorite novel. Dressed in her elegant teal gown, Panora quietly harbors a fragile hope for her upcoming celebration. Clenching her dress, she anxiously wonders if anything will truly change this time around. She vividly recalls the painful humiliation of her past debutante ball where she was ignored and mocked by everyone. An oppressive darkness of past trauma weighs heavily on her mind as she prepares to face the crowd. Staring at her reflection, Panora is fiercely determined to never let herself be mocked by high society again. The blonde-haired maid gently styles her hair, asking her to adjust her chin as they finish her preparations. The maid carefully fastens an elegant red earring onto Panora's ear, adding the perfect finishing touch. Panora opens her eyes with determination as her maid announces that her styling is finally complete. Panora stands transformed in her stunning teal gown, looking every bit the peerless, elegant noblewoman she deserves to be. Despite her beautiful appearance, Panora self-deprecatingly thinks of herself as a mere dressed-up flea. Noticing her distress, the maid asks in concern if Panora dislikes her new hairstyle. Worried maid offers to redo her hair, taken aback by Panora's sudden, gloomy remark. The maid points out that it is Panora's birthday celebration, yet she does not look happy at all. Panora bitterly remembers her parents' neglect, making it impossible for her to enjoy a party thrown by them. Hiding her deep resentment, Panora simply tells her silent maid that she is feeling nervous about the event. She is suddenly pulled from her thoughts as a voice calls out to address her. Panora turns around, her eyes widening in surprise at the unexpected person standing before her. The maid gasps in utter shock, leaving both women momentarily speechless by the sudden turn of events. Leaving her chamber, Panora takes a deep breath and steps out to face the grand birthday celebration. Walking outside, she wonders if even Visago, renowned for her peerless beauty, experienced the same social struggles. The garden party is in full swing, bustling with elegant noble guests, exquisite decorations, and high-end delicacies. Panora notices the guest's high social standing, realizing her engagement to Erokin has completely elevated her social worth. She marvels at how a different fiancé dramatically changed her treatment, before being suddenly interrupted by someone. Erokin appears beside her with a charming smile, his golden eyes gazing down at his stunning fiancé. When she addresses him formally, Erokin sighs playfully and gently reminds her to drop the honorifics. Looking around, Erokin comments that the party is surprisingly small and wishes he had hosted it at his villa. Panora quickly explains that hosting a modest birthday feast at home with family is traditionally considered a virtue. Erokin smiles knowingly, pointing out that she has never actually had a birthday celebration until today. Panora panics internally, wondering if he did a background check on her when a voice suddenly calls her name. Both Panora and Erokin turn around in surprise as an unexpected guest approaches them. A cheerful young man with bright orange hair waves enthusiastically as he walks over to greet them. Standing in the garden, Erokin quietly observes her as they await the approaching orange-haired guest. Panora stares at Erokin in shock, desperately wondering if he went behind her back to investigate her. Seeing her reaction, Erokin calmly notes it is only natural to be curious about one's fiancé. Panora dryly responds that only he could make such an invasive claim with a completely blank expression. Erokin admits he investigated her background to check for issues, claiming it held no deeper meaning. Turning away slightly, Panora bluntly asks him what exactly he is trying to imply with his investigation. Erokin leans in close, revealing with a devious smile that he liked her because of her mistreatment. Confused, Panora wonders if he is merely expressing sympathy for someone who shares a similar painful past. A chilling, knowing smirk plays on Erokin's face, hinting at a much deeper hidden agenda. In a shadowy atmosphere, Erokin clarifies that he refers to their shared, deep-seated resentment toward their families. Their intense conversation is suddenly cut short as a cheerful voice calls out to Panora from behind. The bright orange-haired young man enthusiastically waves at her with a beaming, warm smile. The energetic orange-haired boy happily rushes over to Panora, greeting her with immense warmth and excitement. Caught off guard, Panora accepts a beautifully wrapped birthday present from the enthusiastic young man. The boy proudly reveals he bought her a parasol, eagerly hoping she will like his gift. Standing beside her, a surprised Erokin looks between them and questions how they know each other. Panora sadly notes her mother shouldn't have invited him, but the boy confirms he did receive an invitation. The orange-haired boy sheepishly smiles, admitting he was the one who insisted on coming to her party first. The orange-haired Carl eagerly reminds Panora of his birthday while she looks at him with sudden realization. Carl dejectedly expresses his worry that Panora had completely forgotten about their promise to meet again. Panora internally frats, questioning if neglecting Carl was her mistake and regretting using her connections as bait. Erokin suddenly intervenes, suspiciously questioning the close nature of their relationship and the promises made between them. Caught off guard by his sudden jealousy, Panora can only offer a nervous, hesitating response. Carl cheerfully explains to Erokin that they bonded over a mutual appreciation for dogs during their previous encounter. Carl enthusiastically exclaims their shared love for animals, leaving Erokin highly skeptical of the flimsy excuse. Carl happily adds that Panora promised to show him her estate's horses, prompting Erokin to thoughtfully ponder the invitation. Observing Carl's innocent face, Panora silently notes how surprisingly skilled he is at spinning convincing lies. Carl boldly invites Erokin along, but Erokin quickly declines and pointedly mentions his busy schedule to Panora. Carl insists they set a private date after the celebration, leaving Panora to sigh tiredly in sheer exhaustion. With a bright, cheerful wave, Carl politely bids them farewell and takes his leave from the garden party. Steps fade away as Carl departs, leaving Panora and Erokin standing together in tense silence. Erokin breaks the silence by bluntly questioning whether Panora actually harbors any genuine affection for animals. Panora sweat drops as she mentally equates animals to insects before offering a polite but somewhat forced affirmation. Erokin remains deeply unconvinced, pointing out how unusually fast she arranged a private meeting with Carl. Erokin leans in close, demanding to know if she's genuinely interested in Carl, a prominent marquise's son. Erokin steps even closer to her, casting a heavy shadow over her startled figure. Looking down at his fiancé, Erokin wears a chillingly calm smile that masks his intense jealousy. Panora stares up at him in utter confusion, trying to comprehend what kind of change he is referring to. Roken suddenly embraces her from behind, pulling her close in an unexpected display of possessive affection. Breaking away from his grip, Panora firmly tells him to discard any absurd expectations he might be harboring. The tense moment is interrupted as a maid calls out to Panora, announcing that the madam is summoning her. Roken silently watches her walk away, a faint, knowing smirk lingering on his face as she goes. Inside a grand, sunlit study, a woman in a teal dress stands before a massive, ornate wooden desk. A hand abruptly thrusts a heavy document toward Panora, demanding that she accept the mysterious paperwork. Panora looks down at the document, bitterly realizing this predictable encounter is playing out exactly like her past life. When she questions if this is her birthday present, her cold, blonde-haired father dismissively scoffs in response. Staring at the deed, Panora laments that this mine was destined to be completely lost to a fraudulent scheme. In a painful flashback, her father furiously rages at her for failing to secure the necessary investment funds. The young, tearful Panora desperately apologizes, only to be harshly rebuked by her father's cruel words. She recalls the deep humiliation of being deceived and nearly exiled, begging her father for mercy over 3 painful days. Panora quietly acknowledges that losing such a vast fortune would naturally provoke any noble's intense fury. Releasing a heavy, exhausted sigh, Panora steels her emotions as she prepares to face her father. She looks at the deed, silently wishing for a genuine gesture of care rather than a useless, cursed mine. Standing alone before the windows, she reflects on how much she simply wanted to hear a kind birthday greeting. Bowing politely, Panora offers her formal thanks to her father, deliberately calling him the Count instead of father. The Count turns around in visible shock, deeply stung by her sudden, cold use of his formal title. Looking at his daughter's distant back, the Count mutters with a complicated expression that she is truly grown up. The heavy wooden door clicks shut behind her, leaving her father alone with his lingering regrets in the silent room. The scene shifts to a sunny day as a green carriage rumbles along a peaceful dirt road. Her heels click sharply against the stone as the elegant young woman steps out of the luxurious carriage. Dressed in an elegant brown coat, Panora gazes up at the imposing mansion of the Andras Marquisate. A wavy orange-haired man warmly welcomes Lady Panora Celsius as she arrives at the grand estate. Panora is taken aback, immediately recognizing the welcoming man as the second son of the prominent House Andras. The orange-haired man introduces himself as Carlos, explaining that he is greeting her in the master's absence. Panora politely offers her gratitude to Carlos as she is escorted inside the luxurious mansion. Seated on a sofa with a glass of fruit juice, she gasps softly, reminding herself to stay completely focused. Carlos sits opposite her, watching her with a warm, polite, and attentive expression. Keeping her composure, Panora calmly states that she has come for her scheduled appointment with the third son, Carl. Carlos admits in surprise that he assumed Panora was already aware of the situation. But sighing in deep exasperation, Carlos laments that his younger brother should have informed him of a visitor. Panora calmly inquires about Lord Carl's whereabouts, prompting Carlos to guess his brother simply forgot the appointment. Carlos explains that Carl went to the stables to tend to the horses and promises to summon him. Nora watches in complete bafflement as the servant raises a brass horn to blow a loud summons. A sudden, thunderous horn blast echoes loudly throughout the grand halls of the estate. The servant blows the horn with full force, forcing a startled Panora to cover her ears. Carlos calmly reassures her that his younger brother should be arriving through the gate at any second. Dumbfounded by their bizarre calling method, Panora can only mutter a silent sigh of sheer disbelief. Panorama questions the distance, noting she did not see any stables on her way into the mansion. A heavy, rapid rumbling sound approaches from outside, prompting Panora to look toward the entrance in anticipation. Panora freezes in utter shock as she witnesses a highly unusual sight unfolding before her eyes. Boosh! Carl recklessly gallops into the mansion's grand hallway on horseback, leaving Panora shouting in protest. Halting his mount right in the hallway, Carl cheerfully greets a completely stunned Panora. Carl sheepishly apologizes, admitting he had completely forgotten she was scheduled to visit him today. Sighing deeply, Panora dryly remarks that she has never seen anyone ride a horse inside their own home. Carl casually defends his action by claiming his entire family does this, leaving Panora completely speechless. Panora suggests moving to a more secure, private location to discuss their secret matters without being overheard. Carl readily agrees to her suggestion, confidently offering to lead her to a secluded spot on the estate. While admitting she cannot ride a horse yet, Panora secretly wonders if he will let her ride with him. To her silent disappointment, Carl cheerfully suggests they simply walk to their destination instead. When Panora suggests riding the horse to arrive faster, Carl issues a surprisingly firm and direct refusal. Panora stares at him flatly as Carl begins lecturing her about the dangers of riding a horse recklessly. Carl sternly advises her that she must learn how to ride properly before attempting to mount a horse. Panora grumbles internally at his sudden hypocritical display of high and mighty righteousness. The pair strolls out into a breathtaking sunlit field filled with vibrant yellow flowers under a blue sky. Carl mentions that this beautiful open field is where his family usually goes for leisurely horse rides. Carl assures her that they will not be disturbed here, to which Panora agrees with a quiet nod. Panora shifts the mood, bringing up the serious, lingering matter regarding his injured duel opponent, Shutri. Panora recalls the threat of a lawsuit from the Count over the excessive violence of the duel. Carl is surprised by this, admitting he has not faced any punishment or repercussions from his family. Panora studies Carl's profile closely, carefully gauging his reactions to her revelations about the lawsuit. Smiling softly, Panora praises him for handling the situation exactly as she had previously instructed. Carl notes with relief that she also kept her word and refrained from spreading any damaging rumors. Swish! The soft rustle of grass sounds as Carl pauses mid-step to address her once more. Carl hesitantly asks if his opponent truly died solely because of the injuries from their duel. Whoosh! A gentle gust of wind rustles her dark hair as a heavy silence falls between them. Carl presses the issue, asking if she genuinely believes there is another reason for the opponent's death. Carl recalls a dark past experience where he lost control during a duel and accidentally killed his opponent. Carl explains that he specifically held back this time to ensure his opponent would survive the duel. When Carl laments that his self-control failed this time, Panora firmly shuts down his doubts. Carl insists that, regardless of appearances, his attacks were absolutely not severe enough to be fatal. Looking earnestly at her, Carl begs Panora not to lie to him, reiterating he followed her instructions perfectly. Panora looks down in silent contemplation, her expression unreadable as she prepares her response. Standing together in the middle of the quiet flower field, the tension between them deepens. Panora speaks softly but firmly, declaring that the actions taken were entirely necessary. Panora explains that regardless of the truth, the official story of the opponent's death will remain unchanged. Realization begins to dawn on Carl as he processes her chilling and calculated words. Carl bluntly asks if she had intended to frame him for the murder from the very beginning. Panora calmly admits she needed to test his loyalty and see if he could keep a secret. Carl's fist trembles and tightens as a soft rustling sound escapes his grip. Panora looks down coldly, reflecting on the grim reality of her manipulative test. Carl gazes at her with wide, horrified eyes, struggling to comprehend if she truly killed someone innocent. Standing in the vibrant flower field, Carl accuses her of framing him just to test his secrecy. Carl asks her once again, pleading for the truth about whether she murdered an innocent man. Panora remains silent, her dark eyes looking down as she contemplates her next chilling words. Carl listens quietly as Panora begins to recount a dark tale from the past. Panora narrates the story of a corrupt knight who was deeply addicted to gambling. She explains how the knight accumulated massive debts and desperately planned to escape his responsibilities. Carl looks on with a sweat drop, listening intently as she explains the knight's reckless plan to flee. The dark background shifts as she details how the knight stopped by a local tavern. A shadowy silhouette shows the knight gluttonously consuming expensive food and drinks on credit. The silhouette depicts the bankrupt knight being harshly turned away from an establishment due to lacking cash. A sinister grin spreads across the knight's shadow as he draws his sword in desperation. The knight corners and brutally threatens a terrified young woman on a dark, desolate street. Panora continues her tale, explaining that the knight wandered the territory, committing countless similar atrocities. Panora releases a heavy sigh, her expression growing increasingly solemn as the dark story concludes. She coldly reveals that because she encountered such a vile person, she slaughtered him out of pure disgust. Carl stands in stunned silence, processing her dark confession and the twisted nature of her justice. Carl questions her, pointing out that she achieved brilliant military glory at a very young age. Stepping closer, Panora mockingly asks if he has suddenly grown too cowardly to take lives. Carl looks down, admitting he has no moral aversion to the act of killing itself. Panora's gaze sharpens as she questions the humanity of those who harm others for selfish desires. Carl looks at her with wide, earnest eyes, questioning if such cruelty is truly fit for a human. Carl stares down somberly, reflecting on the moral lessons he was taught about the way to murder. With a soft rustle, Panora turns away dismissively, completely indifferent to his moral protests. Carl lifts his hand, declaring that despite those moral teachings, the blood of Andrus runs through him. A blood-soaked hand rises over fallen bodies, representing his dark urge to witness death to feel satisfied. Carl explains that because of his violent nature, he established a strict personal rule for himself. Carl stares directly at her, his expression serious and unyielding as he prepares to elaborate. A close-up of his boot on the grass punctuates the heavy pause before he says her name. Panora looks away solemnly, announcing her dark resolve to continue killing people from this moment on. Carl looks completely bewildered as she describes her bloody crusade as a mission of revenge. Panora tightly clasps her hands, explaining that her targets have committed sins as vile as the gambling knights. Looking at him with deep vulnerability, Panora begs Carl to join her and assist with her revenge. The perspective shifts to Carl as she internally wonders how he will ultimately respond to her plea. Panora looks down anxiously, wondering how Carl will judge the sins committed by his former opponent, Shutri. Carl turns back, stating that he has something crucial he must share with her. A sudden gasp escapes Panora as her eyes widen in surprise at his unexpected interruption. Carl passionately argues, asking her if taking a life isn't the absolute worst sin of all. Over a background of blood splatters, Carl questions her judgment and warns her about the dangers of a misunderstanding. Carl desperately pleads with her, his face sweating as he tries to break through her cold exterior. With a sudden gasp, Carl suggests finding her own happiness, but Panora fiercely rejects the possibility. Carl defends himself, asking why he should be subjected to her pain when he is entirely innocent. Punching her chest, Panora passionately shouts that her enemies were the ones who struck first. Carl is taken aback as she desperately laments her struggle to finally seize control of her life. Panora hunches over in deep anguish in the open field, admitting she knows this is a wrong path. Carl steps closer, his expression softening with concern as he watches her break down. With a sharp snap, Carl tries to call out to her, but she fiercely cuts him off. Panora's face darkens with terrifying intensity as she commands him to stop talking and answer her question. Panora earnestly asks Carl if he will help her with her revenge or hold her back. Carl looks down in silent hesitation, troubled by her direct and intense question. Carl scratches the back of his head sheepishly, struggling to put his thoughts into words. Looking remorseful, Carl admits he tries to be good but doubts his own morality. Carl explains that he too would feel relieved if his bully simply dropped dead. Empathizing with her pain, Carl offers her his quiet understanding. Carl reasons that if she is resolved enough for revenge, her targets must be guilty. Panora demands to know his final stance as Carl ponders her request. With a gentle smile, Carl warmly promises to help her in her quest. Shocked by his ready agreement, Panora silently reflects on the gravity of her actions. Yielding to her reality, Panora thanks Carl, accepting there is no other choice. Carl's smile turns chilling as he vows to take revenge on her if she breaks her promise regarding the relic. Shivering at his sudden, terrifying intensity, Panora realizes Carl is far too dangerous to easily control. Shifting focus, Panora prepares to ask Carl for a crucial favor now that they are partners. With a chilling smile, Panora directly requests that Carl teach her how to properly kill. Carl looks thoroughly startled as Panora calmly presents her lethal request. Panora walks with Carl, noting his family's combat expertise and asking if he knows human vital points. Looking at him with dark intensity, Panora pleads with him to teach her how to kill. Carl cheerfully asks if she wants to learn about poisons as well, which she gladly accepts. Panora walks happily, secretly celebrating her excellent choice in partnering with the cooperative Coral. Carl leads her toward the training grounds, explaining that looking for poison materials now would seem suspicious. Panora agrees as Carl suggests reviewing the basics under the guise of her watching him train. Carl sheepishly doubts there are any issues, prompting an exasperated shout from an irritated Panora. Panting heavily from exertion, Panora tries to catch her breath after her intense training efforts. Carl looks on with concern and sweat on his face as Panora struggles. Frustrated, Panora yells in anger, holding a training sling as none of her shots hit the target. Carl frantically shushes her, terrified that someone will overhear her loud, angry shouting. Under a literal spotlight of failure, they stare at a completely undamaged wooden training dummy. Carl's sweat drops and asks if she has vision problems in one eye, which she flatly denies. When Carl suggests a neurological issue, Panora furiously snaps, insisting she is perfectly fine. Gritting her teeth in frustration, Panora laments that the weapon looked far easier when Carl used it. Visual demonstration shows a stone hitting the wooden target with immense force. Carl suggests a sling as a small, inconspicuous weapon that can easily neutralize targets. Panora Petter smiles, liking the idea since a sling makes it harder to identify the culprit compared to poison. Carl admits his personal favorite weapon is the spear, though it is far too conspicuous. Gripping a spear firmly, Carl passionately praises it as a truly wonderful weapon. Carl hoists the spear up with a determined grunt, preparing to demonstrate its power. With incredible speed and precision, Carl slices cleanly through heavy wooden logs. Cleanly severed wood blocks fall heavily to the floor by Carl's boot. Carl grins widely, thoroughly satisfied by the great sensation of the strike. Carl gushingly describes the marvelous feeling of piercing an opponent, leaving a deadpan Panora completely unconcerned. Realizing he got distracted, Carl gets back on track and suggests she test the sling. Panora anxiously asks about proper grip, but Carl reassures her the weapon is simple enough. Determined to succeed, Panora readies herself to try the sling. Panora instantly struggles, sweating as she realizes how difficult the weapon is to handle. Carl discourages using the sling, leaving a dejected Panora standing in disappointed silence. Panora recalls hitting targets perfectly in the past whenever she used Io. Panora realizes she should slowly build up her skills since she has Io to assist her. Panora suggests starting with human vital points instead, earning a curious look from Carl. Staring at the weapon rack, Panora reveals her plan to use a poison dagger for her targets. Carl warns Panora that driving a blade through a human body is far more difficult than she expects. He explains that a failed strike could severely injure her own hand instead of harming her target. His gaze intensifies with a cold focus as he reassures her that everything will be fine. Panora asks Carl directly to confirm he will continue to guide and instruct her from now on. Determined to grow stronger, Panora resolves to continuously expand her lethal capabilities. Dark memories resurface as she vows to make everyone who ever hurt her pay the ultimate price. Transitioning to a quiet moment, Carl sits with her and asks if she likes the sandwiches they're sharing. Noticing her lack of enthusiasm, Carl sheepishly asks if the food isn't to her liking. Panora admits she has little interest in food, prompting Carl to ask what truly captures her attention. With chilling calmness, she reveals her only real interest is seeing her enemies buried deep beneath the earth. Carl pauses mid-bite, processing her dark confession with a simple, curious question. Panora bitterly notes how stories and moral teachings always label revenge as evil and preach forgiveness. She scoffs at the idea of forgiveness being a virtue as she releases a heavy sigh. Carl playfully points out that moral teachings claim even the worst sinners can avoid hell through repentance. With a sudden heavy stomp of his boot, Carl remarks that divine punishment is rarely so direct. A mischievous smirk plays on his lips as he continues to challenge common moral beliefs. Panora coldly dismisses the concept of salvation, declaring her place in hell is already guaranteed. Carl sits in silence, quietly observing her unwavering resolve to embrace a dark fate. Carl leans in with a gentle smile, confessing that her dark quest for vengeance actually makes him happy. Panora asks why, prompting Carl to remind her of her promise to continue her bloody crusade. With a bright, cheerful grin, Carl happily proposes that they will eventually meet each other in hell. Panora stares in utter disbelief as he suggests that sharing hell with an acquaintance should bring her comfort. Carl playfully begs her never to repent, leaving Panora completely speechless at his bizarre logic. Underneath his cheerful exterior, a terrifyingly demonic nature briefly reveals itself. Suddenly, the conversation is cut short as the passage of time transports them to a different era. A regal green and gold carriage rattles through the cobblestone gates of a grand estate. Peering anxiously through the carriage window, Panora calls out to her maid, Cecil, as they arrive. Panora asks Cecil in disbelief if they are truly holding her formal engagement ceremony at such a place. Panora stands bewildered before the colossal, majestic palace, questioning her fiancé's choice of venue for a simple ceremony. Panora quickly suppresses her complaints, admitting she yielded all arrangements to her wealthy fiancé. Cecil points toward a dressing area, mentioning the elegant gown and hair ornaments prepared by the Duke. Panora approaches her wedding attire, bitterly wondering what her own family bothered to prepare for her. She solemnly reflects that her family likely has zero interest in the engagement of a child they abandoned. Stepping forward, the elegant ruffles of her beautiful white gown sweep gracefully across the floor. Panora emerges looking absolutely breathtaking in her grand shimmering white gown, captivating everyone in the room. The elderly priest in red robes opens his book, ready to begin the formal ceremony. Panora looks ahead with steady, focused eyes as the priest asks if they shall begin the rites. Her handsome fiancé, Aroken, smiles with a self-satisfied expression, privately reflecting on his own ambitious desires. The noble fiancé stands beside her, plotting how this union will secure immense power and invite envy. Nora sighs quietly, silently regretting her past failure to leverage greater power to her own advantage. Her fiancé notices her sullen expression and casually asks what she is brooding over at such a moment. Panora tells him to guess, to which he smoothly replies that reading minds is not his specialty. Together, the couple stands before the altar as the priest prepares to officiate their union. The fiancé playfully jokes about her lack of patience, earning a silent, irritated glare from Panora. They lower their heads in solemn silence as the priest begins reading the sacred vows of engagement. The priest opens a blue velvet box, presenting 2 exquisite silver rings and instructing them to exchange tokens. Panora gazes at the rings, immediately recognizing that the jewelry is of exceptionally high quality. Holding the ring, she decides she must keep it safe to return it once her secret schemes are complete. With a warm, charming smile, her fiancé gently slides the precious ring onto her slender finger. Nora stares quietly at her newly adorned hand, her expression remaining somber as the ceremony concludes. A grand announcement proclaims the formal promise of union, ringing out near the high cathedral tower. Chattering murmurs echo through the courtyard as the high society guests gather for the prestigious engagement ceremony. Eager noblewomen crowd around the purple-haired Panora, warmly congratulating her on her auspicious engagement. The ladies kindly inquire about her health, noting her long absence from society before her sudden return. Panora smiles politely, though she privately notes how desperate these nobles are to curry favor with the ducal house. She flatters the noblewomen, praising the generous hearts and warmth of the people of the north. Panora delicately coughs, politely declining their invitation under the guise of her fragile health. The noblewomen express deep concern, urging her to take care of herself as Panora demurely bids them farewell. Nearby, a man with a stern expression watches her silently as she walks away from the crowd. An urgent call echoes through the grand hallway, catching Panora's attention through the stained glass windows. Startled, Panora turns around to find a stranger watching her, questioning his identity. Panora scoffs softly, observing the young man with gold eyes who stands before her. The light brown-haired man smiles condescendingly, mocking her for not recognizing the younger brother of her future groom. Realizing his identity, Panora registers the surprise of meeting Oroken's younger brother. Panora bows elegantly, introducing herself and greeting Lord Rose's Zaryar for the very first time. Panora remembers the dark history of the second son, Lord Roses, who allegedly usurped his brother before his tragic demise. Lord Rose's sighs in irritation, criticizing her complete lack of sincerity during the engagement preparations. Panora counters by pointing out that her absence was due to Oroken's severe illness at the time. Lord Roses raises his voice, pointing out that she had never even visited their main northern estate before. Panora politely explains her health concerns, though she secretly questions Lord Rose's aggressive attitude. A chilling smile spreads across Panora's face as she darkly wonders if blood truly flows in his veins. Lord Roses sneers, pointing out that she possesses no significant territory or power of her own. He continues to demean her, calling her a mere ordinary noble unworthy of marrying into their prestigious family. Lord Roses points a finger accusingly, declaring that her marriage into the ducal house was always impossible. Panora looks on with a sharp, calculating gaze, entirely unfazed by his hostile words. Lord Roses reveals that he took the liberty of investigating her background because of his deep suspicions. He steps closer, admitting that his investigation uncovered almost nothing about her past. Lord Roses leans in, describing her as a ghost with no real trace in high society. Panora calmly asks him to wait a moment, remaining perfectly composed under his intense scrutiny. Lord Roses demands to know why she would bring up such strange matters right now. A menacing purple aura surrounds Panora as she coldly resolves not to stay silent under his insults. Lord Roses stammers, trying to defend his harsh words by questioning her suitability. Panora fronts him directly, asking if he is trying to insult her and her family. Lord Roses pleads with her, asking if she truly understands the dangerous nature of his brother Oroken. He warns her to restrain herself for her own safety as another figure quietly approaches them from behind. Polish Grey Boot steps firmly into the hallway, signaling a powerful new presence. Oroken appears suddenly, resting a possessive hand on Panora's shoulder with a menacing smile. Lord Roses gasps in absolute shock, whispering his brother's name as Panora looks back startled. Oroken smiles coldly, stating he will not tolerate anyone pointing fingers at his future wife. Lord Roses grimaces in sheer terror, realizing he has been caught red-handed by his dangerous brother. Lord Roses desperately tries to warn Panora one last time, urging her to heed his advice. Oroken swiftly strikes Lord Roses, cutting him off with a brutal physical blow. Lord Roses collapses to the ground with a painful gasp as Panora watches in stunned silence. Oroken dismissively waves his hand, acting thoroughly annoyed by his brother's pathetic behavior. Looking down coldly, Oroken blames his brother's insolence for forcing him to act so cruelly. Lord Roses groans in pain, clutching his chest on the other side of the stained glass window. Struggling to breathe, Lord Roses weakly asks how long she thinks her act can possibly last. Oroken sighs dramatically, wondering aloud what kind of lover wouldn't get angry at such disrespect. Turning to Panora, Oroken asks if she has still not changed her mind about their union. Lord Roses stares in defeated frustration from the floor as the couple looms over him. Lord Roses gazes back in quiet contemplation, thinking about Panora becoming his brother Oroken's wife. Oroken and Panora walk away together, their footsteps echoing down the grand columned hallway of the palace. Oroken's golden eyes gleam with a subtle, knowing amusement as they walk. Panora sighs deeply, lamenting the exhausting prospect of dealing with difficult in-laws before the wedding has even happened. Oroken offers a mocking smile, comparing her warning to astrologers who remain blind to their own futures. As they walk down the polished hallway, Oroken casually brings up his brother Rose's earlier warnings. Panora asks if he means walking a path of thorns, which Oroken coldly confirms. Closing her eyes in indifference, Panora calmly asserts that such warnings do not matter to her at all. Oroken narrows his golden eyes, noting that her past indeed does not matter to him either. With a pleasant smile, Oroken suggests she should at least understand the motivation behind his brother's hostile behavior. Oroken explains how he lured his brother out, recalling how Roses was furious over the succession being granted to Oroken. Anarola listens intently, realizing that the conflict between the brothers stems entirely from a succession issue. Oroken explains that Roses panicked, fearing this marriage would permanently solidify Oroken's claim to the ducal title. Panora quietly connects the dots, understanding why Roses desperately tried to suggest an annulment. However, Panora quickly realizes that a simple annulment is not the real mystery of this situation. Panora casts a suspicious side glance, wondering why the succession title was almost given to the second son instead of the first. Looking at Oroken's turn back, she silently questions why he was not the immediate choice for heir. They continue walking down the corridor as they discuss the family traditions regarding inheritance. Her boots suddenly come to a halt with a quick stop as she struggles to comprehend the complicated succession. Peering cautiously past his shoulder, Panora prepares to confront Oroken with her nagging suspicion. Clenching his fist tightly, Oroken asks if she is implying there is a dark reason he cannot be the heir. A heavy, tense silence falls over the grand corridor as they stand together. Panora turns to him with wide, startled eyes, nervously asking if he is suggesting she is the problem. Oroken turns back with a chilling, smug smile, challenging her to search for the truth herself. Panora curses internally, realizing she has made a dangerous mistake by prodding too deep. Walking closely behind him, Panora bitterly reflects that she has stepped directly on a dangerous landmine. Stopping him, Panora firmly states they have walked far enough and she expects her servant to be in the nearby room. Orokin dismisses her concerns, casually examining and blowing on his fingernails with complete indifference. Panora gasps in utter shock and confusion at his unexpected declaration. The couple stands together in the hallway as Orokin delivers a startling piece of news. Panora reacts with concern as Orokin casually informs her that she must attend a banquet later today. When Panora protests about the lack of warning, Orokin smugly replies that he is informing her right now. Hanaraw's brow twitches with a sharp vein of pure, unbridled irritation at his arrogance. Fuming with rage, Panora darkly contemplates snapping his neck to punish him for his infuriating behavior. A quick, sharp knock-knock echoes through the silent hall as Panora, now in a golden gown, arrives at a grand door. The brown-haired Duke with a thick mustache looks up in surprise as a voice announces Panora of House Celsius. Sitting by a roaring fireplace, the Duke commands her to enter his private chamber. Panora steps elegantly into the room, politely greeting the Duke, who responds with a gruff mumble. The Duke praises her, noting that her etiquette is absolutely superb even before her official society debut. Bowing gracefully, Panora accepts his compliment as the Duke warmly tells her there is no need for stiffness among family. The Duke reflects on his surprise when Orokin suddenly woke up and claimed to have finally found his true love. Panora sweats nervously, internally questioning Erakun's incredibly blunt and aggressive approach to convincing his father. The Duke calls out to her, signaling that he has a serious inquiry to make. Tilting her head curiously, Panora asks what the Duke wishes to know. The Duke nervously clasps his trembling, sweaty hands together in front of her. Leaning forward, the Duke asks if Orokin truly confessed to loving her from the bottom of his heart. The Duke repeats his address to her, preparing to probe deeper into their sudden union. Panora looks back with mild curiosity, waiting for him to ask his question. Suddenly, Panora's purple eyes widen in sheer stunned disbelief at his line of questioning. Looking down in silence, Panora realizes this is an incredibly unexpected and delicate question to handle. Panora suspects the Duke is probing for a deeper secret rather than just a simple romance story. Panora prepares to lie, knowing her marriage to Lord Orokin is purely a business arrangement. Panora spins a romantic tale, claiming Orokin passionately confessed his love to her. The Duke is utterly dumbfounded to hear that his cold son fell in love at first sight. Panora continues her act, praising Erakun's attentiveness while the Duke quietly repeats the word in disbelief. A crackling fire fills the tense silence as the Duke addresses Lady Celsius. The Duke admits he believed Orokin incapable of love, catching Panora completely off guard by his confession. The Duke admits his deep-seated worries regarding his eldest son's inherently difficult personality. Panora carefully prompts him to elaborate, but the Duke remains momentarily silent. The Duke wonders if Orokin is human after all, assuming Panora must have already seen his true nature. Panora silently realizes the Duke believes Orokin is merely playing a sweet role for her. The Duke stands up, acknowledging her confusion but preparing to explain further. The Duke reveals he wants her to understand why he eagerly approved their mismatched union. The Duke expresses his hope that Panora will finally bring a positive change to his son. Panora is left speechless as the Duke suddenly approaches and gently takes her hands. Panora realizes the Duke's actions stem from a father's deep desperation for his son's emotional salvation. Panora smoothly flatters the Duke by declaring she loves Orokin exactly as he is. Delighted by her answer, the Duke laughs heartily, praising her as a wonderful future daughter-in-law. A warm fatherly hand pat lands on Panora's shoulder as a gesture of deep trust. The Duke earnestly implores Panora to be a good wife to Orokin for his sake. Panora inwardly mocks the vague, sentimental expectations of being a good spouse. Panora recalls the contract terms of their marriage, which was designed to end in divorce after 3 years. Panora outwardly accepts, resolving to play her part of the devoted wife perfectly for now. Morning arrives, casting a bright light over the grand spires of the ducal estate. Panora wakes up in her luxurious guest chamber, letting out a weary stretch. Realizing she cannot train with so many servants watching, Panora finds herself bored and idle. Her gaze lands on the ornate calling bell resting on the bedside table. Panora rings the bell, hoping a servant will bring some fresh water for her face. The bell chimes echo softly through her massive grand bedroom. Panora is caught by surprise when a prompt knock sounds, requesting permission to enter. Panora hesitantly calls out for whoever is waiting outside to enter. With a soft click, the grand double doors of the chamber swing open. A group of maids floods into the bedroom to help Panora prepare for the day. Cheerful maids immediately get to work opening the curtains to let the sunlight in. As they begin brushing her long wavy hair, one of the maids gasps in surprise. Panora blinks in confusion at the maid's sudden excitement. The young maid giggles, claiming she now understands why the young master fell for her. Panora stares back in silent irritation as the head maid quickly scolds the talkative girl. The head maid bows deeply, apologizing for her subordinate's overly familiar behavior. Panora silently notes that despite the girl's loose tongue, she is remarkably skilled at her work. Panora touches her hair, amazed at how incredibly silky and smooth it feels after being styled. A painful childhood memory resurfaces, recalling how her father rejected her because of her dark hair and eyes. She remembers her mother bitterly blaming her very existence and appearance for their family's tragic downfall. Panora gazes into the mirror, reflecting on the lifelong curse of her dark features. The scene transitions to the dining hall where Panora sits at an impossibly long table. Sitting alone, Panora questions the maid about the absence of the Duke and his younger son. Orokin suddenly chimes in, explaining that his father is busy and Roses is avoiding him. Orokin looks across the table, softly calling out Panora's name to get her attention. Orokin smoothly invites her to accompany him on a trip to the town after breakfast. Panora blinks in utter bewilderment at his sudden and unexpected invitation. Orokin explains that he purchased opera tickets to prevent Panora from getting bored before the upcoming banquet. Panora looks down with a deeply annoyed expression, clearly unenthusiastic about the sudden change in plans. Smiling pleasantly, Orokin holds up the theater tickets and asks if she will join him. The scene shifts to describe an opera, a grand stage performance where the actors sing of tragic tales. As the carriage rolls forward, Panora internally questions the suddenness of the adding. Seated opposite each other inside the moving carriage, both admit they have never actually seen an opera before. Panora demands to know why they are going so suddenly if neither of them has any interest in theater. Panora explains she planned to transcribe theological texts, leaving Orokin bewildered by her choice of a hobby. A quiet tension settles between them as the carriage continues to rattle along the cobblestone streets. Panora astutely points out that this sudden public outing is merely a performative show for the public eye. Resting his chin on his hand, Orokin quietly ponders what made his father approve of their engagement so readily. Orokin sits back, wondering aloud if his father's recent illness somehow altered his usual way of thinking. Orokin asserts that they must maintain this false romance perfectly to ensure their contract remains hidden from society. Panora quietly yields to his logic, accepting that they have no choice but to play along. Gazing out the carriage window, Panora resolves to put on a flawless performance during her temporary stay. They arrive at the Grand Opera House, instantly drawing the attention of the whispering high society guests below. Standing at the balcony beside Orokin, Panora becomes the subject of intense gossip among the curious onlookers. Panora sighs quietly, realizing the onlookers are far more interested in observing Orokin than the actual stage performance. Settling into their ornate box seats, Panora anxiously wonders exactly how many hours this long opera will last. Leaning in close, Orokin whispers that he brought her here simply out of his own genuine curiosity. A sudden closeness lingers between them as their shoulders brush together in the dim light of the theater. Orokin turns to her with a handsome smile, reassuring her that the play will run for 3 hours at most. Panora stares at him, captivated by how incredibly striking and picture-perfect his smile truly is. The grand chandelier begins to dim, signaling the long-awaited start of the theatrical performance. On stage, the actors passionately embrace and sing of a love that has traversed 1,000 miles. The narrator introduces the play's premise, centering around a legendary sacred relic that possesses power over time. The story follows a protagonist granted eternal youth, destined to watch everyone she loves pass away before her. Panora watches from her seat, quietly analyzing the emotional gravity and skill of the lead opera singer. On stage, the tragic heroine laments over her lover's body, declaring that eternal life is meaningless without him. Observing the tragic climax, Panora sits in silent contemplation, deeply affected by the play's dramatic themes. The stage play details the divine nature of Europa, a sacred relic gifted by God himself. The performance illustrates a mysterious hooded figure presenting the mystical relic to a young noblewoman. The actors passionately perform the scene of the relic being bestowed as a token of profound gratitude. Holding the prop, the actress sings of the sorrowful misfortune that has befallen such a pure soul. Panora reflects on the actress's words, drawing parallels to her own life played out like a grand theater. Beautiful melodies float through the grand theater box as Panora remains immersed in the emotional musical score. As the final notes fade, Panora turns her attention back toward her stoic fiancé beside her. Orokin sits quietly with his chin resting in his hand, his expression thoughtful and somewhat distant. Panora observes his quiet demeanor, wondering what thoughts are occupying his mind as the play concludes. The theater erupts into enthusiastic applause from the crowd below as the tragic play officially comes to an end. The audience files out of the grand hall, raving over how marvelous the performance was. Walking down the steps, Orokin remarks that while the opera was excellent, it certainly started quite late. Orokin turns to Panora with a pleasant smile, asking if his precious fiancée enjoyed her very first opera. Gently reaching out, Panora tightly grasps his arm with a sudden, deliberate warmth. Panora looks up at him with a radiant, joyful smile, declaring that the performance was absolutely fascinating. Orokin's golden eyes widen in sudden, genuine shock at her unexpectedly warm and affectionate response. Leaning in close, Panora playfully whispers that her only regret about the entire theatrical show. Looking up at him with a sweet, teasing blush, she states the lead actor wasn't nearly as handsome as him. Orokin is left completely dumbfounded, his heart racing as he stares at her breathtaking, playful expression. As they walk away together into the glowing pink sunset, Orokin quietly realizes he no longer needs eternal life. Sitting in the moving carriage, Orokin quietly breaks the silence by softly calling out Panora's name. Arms crossed, Orokin turns back to look directly at her, ready to share his genuine thoughts. Orokin gently observes that she looked as though she was deeply suffering during the long opera performance. Surprised by his sudden perceptiveness, Panora looks up as he quietly addresses her by her name. Sitting opposite her, Orokin directly asks if she found the grand performance earlier to be completely boring. Downcast, Panora admits that she easily recognizes the look of utter disinterest based on her own experiences. Observing her endurance through an opera she clearly disliked, Orokin reveals he has suddenly changed his mind. Panora quietly folds her hands, resolving to play her part as his devoted fiancé perfectly from now on. Her quiet determination is suddenly interrupted when Orokin calls out her name, catching her completely off guard. Orokin admits that his deep dislike for general entertainment extends far beyond just the theatrical opera. Gazing thoughtfully aside, he confesses that even hunting, his only decent hobby, has grown boring lately. When Orokin explains his lack of interests, Panora suggestively asks why he cannot simply find a new hobby. With a charming, pleasant smile, Orokin confidently asserts that he has fortunately already found a new one. Sweating slightly in confusion, Panora looks at him sideways, wondering what his sudden interest could possibly be. Gesturing smoothly with his hand, Orokin prepares to deliver his unexpected conclusion to their quiet carriage conversation. The atmosphere softens into a warm pink glow as Orokin gently speaks her name in a tense pause. Leaning in close amidst a flurry of blooming flowers, Orokin charmingly declares that he finds her quite delightful. The scene shifts with a striking dark transition, building anticipation for the unexpected turn of their conversation. Gesturing with his hand again, Orokin continues his bold speech, keeping her suspended in tense curiosity. Panora stares back at him with a completely blank, speechless expression, utterly stunned by his sudden forwardness. Recovering her composure, Panora flatly offers her polite thanks with an amused, disbelieving look on her face. Orokin leans in slightly, playfully noting that her underwhelming reaction is far too lukewarm for his taste. He clarifies that his interest in her extends far beyond their mere temporary marriage contract. Pointing a finger up with a confident smile, Orokin boldly declares his genuine desire to actually marry her. The shocking proposal echoes in Panora's mind as the carriage wheels rattle loudly against the road. Panora lunges forward in disbelief, indignantly questioning what could possibly be nice about making her his real wife. Staring at him with wide, intense eyes, Panora firmly states that she has absolutely no desire to marry. Panora's mind flashes back to her true motive of vengeance, reminding herself not to let romance derail her. Orokin remains perfectly composed, casually noting her refusal with a relaxed, unfazed expression on his handsome face. Letting out an exasperated sigh, Panora demands to know why he's suddenly boasting about his hunting skills. Smiling confidently, Orokin explains that his dedication naturally made him highly skilled in pursuing his targets. Resting his hand on his knee, Orokin coolly warns her that he is relentless when chasing his prey. Staring back with a cold, solemn expression, Panora absorbs his warning to be fully prepared for him. As the carriage rolls past the grand estate, Panora irritably grumbles about being compared to a beast. Back at the estate dining room, Orokin laughs heartily as the maids quietly attend to his meal. Sitting across from him, Panora politely forces a sweet smile while gently dabbing her mouth with a napkin. A quiet, slightly tense dinner continues as the two dine together under the warm glow of candlelight. Later in her bedroom, Panora politely requests a servant to prepare some writing paper and a pen. A sudden sharp knock sounds at her door, prompting Panora to turn her head in curious surprise. Orokin personally delivers a fresh stack of paper and a quill, leaving her utterly dumbfounded by his service. A hand rests on the grand wooden door as it is quietly shut, restoring silence to the room. Looking down at the paper, Panora deeply ponders what on earth could have triggered a sudden change. Gripping her head in sheer frustration, Panora laments how incredibly difficult both Nibirius and Orokin are to manage. Sitting alone at her desk, she gazes out the window, quietly wondering why people crave romance so desperately. Memories of emotional heartbreak flash through her mind, prompting a dark, cynical reaction to those weak-minded fools. Dipping her quill, Panora smirks as she concludes that people only ruin their lives by chasing after love. A sudden resonant chime echoes from the gram clock on the wall, signaling the arrival of midnight. In a dimly lit room elsewhere, a gloved hand holds an intriguing letter sent from a familiar name. Two dark, silhouetted nobles discuss the unexpected letter, identifying the sender as Orokin of Hauseriar. The silhouetted noblewoman realizes with a faint smile that Orokin apparently wishes to offer her a formal apology. Observing her reflection, the noblewoman reluctantly decides to accept the formal invitation of apology. Back at the Zariar ducal house, Panora carefully examines a glowing document as Vasako prepares for the banquet. Panaria recalls the previous day's events, wondering if this banquet is the exact same one as before. Sweating slightly, Panora realizes she might be able to piece together the truth behind their plans. Walking down the long carpeted corridor, Panora deeply ponders the true relationship between Orokin and Vasako. Turning to Orokin, Panora directly asks if he is acquainted with Lady Vasako Geldum. Finding her question unusual, Orokin listens as Panora claims she is merely curious about ducal family relations. A soft hum escapes Orokin's lips as his golden eyes narrow in deep contemplation. Panora is utterly stunned when Orokin casually reveals he has never even spoken to Vasako before. Orokin explains that their families are not on friendly terms, having only briefly crossed paths once. Panora notes that Vasago's name never came up, realizing the timeline has completely diverged from the script.
Tension grips Panora as she sweats in silence, processing this massive divergence in the narrative. Orokin leans in close to ask if she dislikes the custom dress he prepared for her. Instantly masking her worry, Panora sweetly suggests they head inside to meet his waiting father. The Grand Ducal Estate stands majestic under a bright, clear sky as their long carriage journey concludes. Complaining of a stiff neck from the long carriage ride, Panora is attended to by her diligent maid. Panora recalls Orokin's ridiculous dinner confession where he bluntly admitted he only liked her for her looks. Slumping with exhaustion, Panora drags herself down the grand hallway after a tiring and eventful day. The estate's butler greets her upon her return, and she tiredly confirms her arrival. The butler hesitantly presents her with a mysterious letter sealed with a bright red wax stamp. Panora carefully takes the letter, her curiosity piqued by the unexpected and formal correspondence. Her eyes widen in silent realization as she looks closely at the letter's urgent contents. The maid returns to announce that the hot water is ready, but stops mid-sentence in surprise. Ignoring her maid's confusion, Panora suddenly dashes past her at full speed, leaving the room instantly. Clutching the paper tightly, she reads the shocking notice announcing the death of the late head butler Lonway. The official notice grimly confirms the passing of the estate's former head butler Longway. Panora remembers the frail elderly butler who had served faithfully despite his declining and sickly health. A sudden wave of intense shock and realization washes over her as the pieces fall into place. Clutching the death notice, Panora sprints down the hall, an ecstatic and triumphant smile lighting up her face. The story pauses on a dramatic teaser illustration, building high anticipation for the next chapter.